Navy SEAL came home with his German Shepherd, hoping to apologize to the aunt who raised him. But her house was no longer hers, and strangers were living behind the door she once left open for him. Then the dog caught a scent beneath the frozen porch, a torn piece of wool, buried in ice. By nightfall, the shepherd led him behind an old lighthouse, where his aunt was hiding in the cold. She was freezing, ashamed, and holding the first clue to a secret the whole town had been too afraid to speak. What began as one missing home would uncover stolen letters, hidden files, and a cruel betrayal of the elderly. Watch until the end, then tell us where you are watching from, share your thoughts, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Snowbright Harbor shone like a town that had never sinned. Under the clean northern sky of Michigan, winter had laid its bright hand over everything. Snow rested on pitched roofs and porch rails, filled the cracks between old bricks, and softened the shoulders of mailboxes along the road. Lake Superior stretched beyond the pines in a sheet of blue silver, half water, half glass, holding the pale sun as if heaven had dropped a coin into its depths. The town looked almost holy from a distance. That was what made the wrongness harder to see. Main Street glowed with warm shop windows. The bakery breathed cinnamon and butter into the cold. The small grocery had a wreath on its door and a painted sign promising fresh coffee. Beyond the square, black pines rose thick and still, their branches bowed beneath white weight. Everything seemed careful, quiet, preserved. A stranger might have called it peaceful. Beckett Calloway knew better than to trust a place just because it looked beautiful. He drove into Snowbright Harbor in an old dark blue pickup with rust along the wheel wells and a dent above the rear bumper. At 34, Beckett still carried the shape of the Navy SEAL teams in his body. Even though he had recently stepped away from the uniform, he was 1.83 meters tall, lean and solid, with the compact strength of a man built for endurance rather than display. His face was clean-shaven, all square jaw and defined cheekbones, with gray-blue eyes that noticed too much and gave away too little. His dark brown hair was cut neat in a military style, just a little longer than standard SEAL regulations, as if civilian life had been allowed to touch him but not yet change him. The northern wind had weathered his fair skin, giving him the faint roughness of a man who had spent too many years under hard skies. He wore an old tactical combat shirt in olive green mixed with military gray, frayed lightly at the shoulders and cuffs, old combat pants in earthy brown and moss green, worn brown military work boots, and a black military watch on his left wrist. He looked like a man who could survive almost anything. The trouble was, survival had never taught him how to come home. Beside him sat Mica, a 7-year-old male German Shepherd K9, with the calm, watchful dignity of a creature born to guard both doors and hearts. His working body was strong and balanced, his coat sharply black and tan, with a dark saddle across his back and warm brown along his chest and legs. His muzzle was slightly darker, touched with a little gray that made him look wiser than some judges Beckett had met. His amber-brown eyes were alert and intelligent, his ears erect, catching every sound beneath the hum of the truck heater. Around his neck was a worn brown leather collar with a small metal tag. One side read, Mica. The other side, in Miriam Calloway's careful engraving, read, Bring them home. Beckett had read those words too many times on the drive north. Behind the seats were the offerings of a man who had no idea how to apologize properly. A box of blueberry hand pies tied with string, a cream-colored wool scarf wrapped in brown paper, and a card he had rewritten until the paper looked tired. Aunt Mary, I should have come sooner. Aunt Mary, sending money was not the same as showing up. Aunt Mary, I kept telling myself there would be time. None of the sentences had survived the final mile. Miriam Miri Calloway was 72 years old, though in Beckett's memory she existed outside age. She was the woman who had taken him in at 9 after his parents died in a winter ferry accident on Lake Superior. She had been the one to make him breakfast when he refused to eat, to teach him how to split kindling, how to patch a torn sleeve, how to say sorry without making a parade of it. She was small in stature but enormous in presence, with pale blue-gray eyes, silver-white hair, and a stubborn mercy that could warm a room faster than any stove. She had once told him that a house did not need to be big. It just needs someone willing to leave a light on for you, she had said. For years, Beckett had let that light burn without walking toward it. The road curved along Heron Point, where the pines thinned and the lake opened wide. Then the house appeared. For a moment, Beckett forgot to breathe. It stood above the shore exactly where it had always stood. A white wooden house with a sloped roof, a porch facing the water, and a chimney that used to smoke on bitter mornings. Beyond it, the old lighthouse rose in the distance, pale and weathered against the winter sky. The shape of the house struck him like an old hymn. Then the details arrived. The fence was new, not repaired, replaced. The porch rail had been sanded and painted too cleanly. The shell wind chime Miriam had made from beach glass and old twine was gone. The left side of the porch, where her rocking chair used to sit, was empty. The front step did not sag. The second board did not creak. That absence troubled him more than rot would have. Mica sat up fully. Beckett parked near the drive, his hand still on the wheel. The hand pies waited in the back seat. The scarf lay beside them, soft and foolish and late. "You feel that?" he murmured. Mica did not look at him. The dog's eyes were fixed on the house. Beckett stepped out into the cold. The air smelled of lake ice, pine, and new varnish. That last scent did not belong. Mica jumped down beside him and moved close to his left leg, silent except for the crunch of his paws in the snow. The porch looked almost right. Almost was a cruel word. Beckett climbed the steps. When his boot landed on the second board and it made no sound, something inside him tightened. That step had always groaned like an old man being asked to dance. Miriam used to say it kept thieves honest and nephews humble. He knocked. Footsteps approached from inside, light, quick, unfamiliar. The door opened to a woman Beckett had never seen before. She looked to be in her early 40s, tall and narrow-shouldered, with smooth chestnut hair pulled into a loose knot and pale skin warmed by the indoor light. She wore cream-colored lounge clothes and thick socks, the kind of person who had come north to enjoy winter from behind expensive windows. Her face was not unkind. It was only unaware, which sometimes hurt worse. "Can I help you?" she asked. Behind her, the living room looked like a staged memory. A gray sofa stood where Miriam's old green couch should have been. The curtains were new. The rug was new. A candle burned on a side table, trying to smell like cedar but failing with confidence. Beckett's training made its quiet inventory. Unknown occupant, new interior. No sign of Miriam, no wood smoke, no old geranium pots, no familiar sounds. His heart made a different inventory. Lost, wrong, too late. He forced his voice into calm. "Sorry," he said, "I'm looking for Heron Lane. Thought this road connected through." The woman relaxed a little. "Easy mistake. This is Heron Point Road. Heron Lane is closer to town. Appreciate it." Beckett let his gaze move past her for only half a second. "Beautiful place. You folks been here long?" "Just a few weeks," she said. "We're renting for the winter. It's through Pine Bridge Elder Stewardship. Some kind of winter cottage renewal program." She gave a polite laugh, as if the title were too long for her interest. "We just liked the view." Pine Bridge Elder Stewardship. The name entered Beckett cleanly, like a blade slid between ribs. He said,
"Thanks for your help."
The woman smiled, cautious but relieved, and began to close the door. Mica moved, not forward, not aggressively. He lowered his muzzle to the right side of the porch, near the door frame, where Miriam used to leave her snow boots. His black nose worked slowly over the boards. Then he gave a sound Beckett had heard only in ruined places and hospital rooms, a low breath that was not quite a whine. The woman's smile faded. Beckett placed 2 fingers lightly on Mica's collar. "Come on." Mica did not obey at first. He sniffed again, then scraped one paw gently along a narrow gap between 2 newly replaced boards. Something blue appeared beneath the ice. Beckett crouched and pulled it free. It was a small piece of knitted wool, frozen stiff at one edge, blue-green like lake water under pine shade, a torn cuff, the kind Miriam used to knit when she pretended she was only keeping her hands busy and not worrying about everyone she loved. The woman in the doorway looked down at it. "Is something wrong?" Beckett closed his fist around the wool. "No," he said. It was a lie so cold it did not even steam. He guided Mica back to the truck without looking over his shoulder. He had learned long ago that when a room struck you, you did not show it where the wound landed. But inside him, something had already begun to move. Not rage. Rage was too loud. This was colder. This had patience. At the truck, Beckett opened the passenger door, but Mica did not climb in. The German Shepherd stood in the snow facing the house, ears rigid, eyes fixed on the porch as if someone unseen had whispered from beneath the boards. Then the metal tag on his collar swung once and tapped against the ring. "Bring them home." The sound was small. Still, Beckett felt it in his chest like a church bell buried under ice. He looked at the piece of wool in his fist and realized Mica had not found an old memory. He had found proof that Miriam had been here recently, and someone had replaced the porch after she was gone. Beckett drove into town as the sun lowered behind the pines. Snowbright Harbor still looked innocent. The bakery windows glowed amber. The grocery had a string of white lights above the awning. A few locals crossed the street with paper bags tucked beneath their arms. Tires hissed softly over salted roads. Somewhere near the square, a bell rang from a shop door. bright and cheerful, as if the town had no shame to carry. Beckett stopped first at Bluebird Crust Bakery, because Miriam had once said the best way to learn the health of a town was to listen near its bread. Behind the counter stood a woman in her late 50s with a round face, flour on one sleeve, and reddish hair fading into gray beneath a blue kerchief. Her name tag read Ellen. She had the practical warmth of someone who could comfort a crying customer and still scold him for blocking the doorway. When Beckett asked about Miriam Calloway, Ellen's hands paused over a tray of rolls, only for a second, but Beckett saw it. "Miri?" she said, trying to smile. "Haven't seen her much lately." "How lately?" Ellen looked toward the front window, then toward Mica waiting in the truck outside. "A while." "Did she move?" "I wouldn't know, honey." Honey was not affection, it was a curtain. Beckett bought nothing. He thanked her and left the box of hand pies untouched behind his seat. Next came Harbor Light Library, a small brick building with brass handles and warm yellow lamps glowing between shelves. The librarian, Jessa Pruitt, was a thin woman of 58 with ash-brown hair streaked in silver and pinned low at the back of her neck. She wore wire-rimmed glasses and a long olive cardigan that made her look like a person who had chosen quiet as both occupation and shelter. Her face was narrow and kind, but fear had settled around her mouth in fine lines. At Miriam's name, Jessa's eyes lowered to the sign-in sheet on the desk. "Miriam has always liked the reading room," she said. "Present tense?" Beckett asked. Jessa folded her hands. Her fingers were long and pale, librarian's hands made for smoothing pages and avoiding conflict. "I'm sorry. I don't know what you mean." Beckett believed she knew exactly what he meant. He did not press, not yet. Fear, like ice, cracked better when warmed slowly. At Wick's Tackle Supply, the owner was a wiry man named Carl Wick, about 65, with a weather-browned face, white stubble on his chin, and hands scarred from hooks, rope, and cold metal. Carl had the guarded manner of men who spoke more easily to engines and fish than to people. When Beckett said Miriam's name, Carl began rearranging a display of lures with unnecessary care. "She's proud," Carl muttered. "That doesn't answer where she is." "No," Carl said, "it doesn't." His hand trembled as he hooked a silver lure back into place. Beckett watched him for a moment. Carl looked away first. By late afternoon, the cold had sharpened. Snow began falling in fine bright grains beneath the street lamps. Beckett stood beside the truck near the harbor road, one hand resting on the open door, Mica at his side. Every answer had been a closed door pretending to be a window. She signed something. Pinebridge helped her, probably wanted privacy. Old folks get confused about paperwork. Maybe she didn't want family involved. Each sentence had carried the same hidden shape, guilt wrapped in politeness. Beckett looked toward the lake. The old lighthouse stood beyond the harbor, pale against the dimming sky. Its maintenance shed leaned nearby, white paint peeling, red door battered by years of wind. The sight pulled something from childhood. Miriam taking him there on a day he refused school, handing him a thermos of cocoa, telling him lighthouses were stubborn little miracles. "They don't stop storms," she had said. "They just tell lost fools where the rocks are." Mica suddenly lifted his head. His ears came forward. His body stilled in that complete way working dogs have, as if every bone had become a listening post. "What is it?" Beckett asked softly. Mica moved before the question ended. He pulled toward the harbor, not frantic but certain. Beckett followed. The wind off Lake Superior struck hard along the pier, carrying the smell of ice, diesel, old rope, and fish scales. Past the dock, beyond the public walkway, the lighthouse grounds sat behind a half-buried chain fence. No one had bothered locking the side gate properly. It banged lightly in the wind. Mica slipped through the opening and headed toward the maintenance shed. The closer they came, the more Beckett smelled it. Bleach, cold water, wet wool. The scent did not belong outside in the snow. A dim light burned in a rear window of the shed. Beckett approached carefully, not hiding exactly, but keeping his footsteps soft. Through the glass, he saw movement. An elderly woman in an oversized coat bent over a mop bucket. For a second, his mind refused what his body already knew. The angle of her shoulders. The careful pause before she straightened, as if asking old bones for permission. The stubborn lift of her chin even when no one was watching. "Aunt Miri," he whispered. Mica pushed forward and scratched once at the door. Inside, the woman froze. Beckett opened the door. The small back room smelled of bleach, lake damp, rust, and old paper. A single heater buzzed weakly near the wall, losing its argument with winter. The floor was wet in streaks. A metal bucket sat beside a stack of rags. There were cardboard boxes along one wall, most of them turned so their labels faced away. Miriam Calloway stood near the bucket, one hand gripping the mop handle. She was smaller than memory had any right to make her. 72 years had thinned her frame, but hardship had done the sharper carving. Her silver-white hair had slipped loose from beneath a gray scarf. Her pale blue-gray eyes widened with terror before they found recognition. Her worn winter coat hung too large on her narrow shoulders, and her hands were red and raw from cold water and cleaning chemicals. Beneath the coat she wore a faded sweater, practical dark pants, and old winter boots crusted with salt. She looked, in that first awful moment, like someone trying to apologize for still being alive. "Nolan," she almost said, but caught herself. The wrong name, perhaps from another memory. Then her mouth trembled. "Beckett." The mop fell. Mica reached her first. He did not bark. He did not jump. He slowed at the last step and pressed his head gently into her hand. Miriam stared down at him. "Mica," she whispered. The dog leaned harder, as if answering not only for himself but for all the years Beckett had failed to arrive. Beckett crossed the room slowly. He had breached doors in worse places. He had pulled wounded men through smoke. He had stood under skies that broke open with fire. But nothing in his training had prepared him for the sight of the woman who had raised him standing in a freezing shed with bleach burns on her hands. "Aunt Miri." She pulled her hand away from Mica and tried to smooth her coat. It was a small gesture, useless and devastating. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she said. That sentence undid him more than tears would have. Not the house, not the strangers, not Pine Bridge, not the piece of wool in his pocket. That sentence. Beckett stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her carefully at first, because she felt too light, like winter had been taking her by degrees. Then he held her tighter, because Miriam had never been fragile to him. She had been the roof, the breakfast table, the porch light, the woman who stood between a grieving boy and the rest of the world, with nothing but stubborn love and a wooden spoon. "I'm here," he said. His voice came out rough. "I'm here." For 1 second, Miriam resisted crying. Even then, she seemed to think grief needed permission. Then a sound broke from her, small and old and human. "I lost it," she whispered against his shoulder. "I lost the house. I lost what you sent. I lost the letters. I was so ashamed." Beckett closed his eyes. Mica stood pressed against them both, black and tan body steady as an oath. "I don't care about the money," Beckett said. "Do you hear me?" "I don't care." Miriam shook her head. "You should." "No." He drew back enough to look at her face. "I care that you were alone." Her mouth folded inward, and tears spilled down her weathered cheeks. Outside, snow tapped softly against the shed window. The lighthouse stood above them, blind in the dusk, its old white tower watching like some tired guardian from a forgotten myth. There was no choir, no justice arriving with trumpets, no hand of heaven descending through the roof. Only a man who had come home late, an old woman who had hidden her ruin, and a dog with a metal tag that knew the way before either of them could bear to. Miriam gripped Beckett's sleeve. Her voice dropped, thin and urgent. "They said if I didn't sign the winter safety papers, the house would be declared unsafe. They said the repair debt could follow the family. They said because you'd sent money, your name could be pulled into it if I made trouble." Beckett went still. Miriam swallowed. "And they're coming in 7 days to take the porch apart. They said it's only the first step." Beckett looked down at Mica. The dog's amber eyes lifted to his. Then Beckett opened his fist and looked at the frozen blue-green wool cuff Mica had found beneath the porch boards. For years, he had told himself he would come home when the missions ended, when the noise stopped, when he became the kind of man who knew how to enter a room without carrying ghosts behind him. Now the ghosts had beaten him home, and Snowbright Harbor, bright as a postcard under the winter sky, had become a battlefield with no gunfire, no uniforms, no enemy lines drawn in dirt. Only paper, shame, a stolen house, and 7 days before the last proof of Miriam Calloway was ripped from the porch, where she had once left a light burning for him. The road from the old lighthouse to Sunrise Motor Court was less than 3 miles, but to Beckett Calloway it felt like crossing the distance between 2 lives. Miriam sat in the passenger seat of his dark blue pickup with both hands folded in her lap, as if she were afraid to touch anything that belonged to comfort. The cream-colored scarf he had bought for her remained unopened on the back seat beside the damp box of blueberry hand pies. The heater pushed warm air into the cab, but she kept her shoulders drawn up inside her worn coat. Mica stood in the narrow space behind the front seats, his large black and tan body balanced with the smooth control of a working dog who knew when silence mattered. His amber-brown eyes stayed fixed on Miriam. Every few moments his nose moved toward her sleeve, catching the sour traces of bleach, lake wind, wet wool, and something older. Old paper, ink, dust from cardboard boxes. Beckett noticed because noticing had kept him alive in places where a missed detail could become a grave. But this was not a battlefield with sand, radios, and muzzle flashes. This was a winter road in a bright northern town, and the wounded person beside him was the woman who had once taught him how to butter toast without tearing it. Miriam looked smaller in the truck than she had in the lighthouse shed. 72 years had thinned her, but shame had done the crueler work. Her silver-white hair had slipped loose around her scarf. Her pale blue-gray eyes watched the passing houses, but seemed afraid of being seen by them. Beneath the dashboard light, Beckett saw red cracks across her knuckles from cold water and cleaning chemicals. He wanted to say 10 things. I should have come sooner. I should have known. I should have answered the quiet in your voice. Instead, he said, "You warm enough?" Miriam gave a small nod. This truck always did have a better heater than manners. The words were faint, but they were hers. A dry little spark in the snow. Beckett almost smiled. The heater was raised by better people. That explains it. Mica huffed once from the back seat, as if adding a complete legal opinion. Miriam glanced back at him. Her mouth trembled, not quite a smile. And you still look innocent when you know very well you are not. Mica turned his head toward the window with great dignity. For a few seconds, the cab held something like life. Then the motel sign came into view. Sunrise Motor Court sat at the edge of Snowbright Harbor where the town lights gave way to pine trees and the long, dark shoulder of the road north. Its neon sign flickered in the falling snow, the word sunrise blinking unevenly so that every few seconds it became sun, as though even dawn needed help finishing its work. The building was a low row of rooms with red doors, old storm windows, and a vending machine humming under a small awning. Beckett parked near the office. Before he could open his door, Miriam touched his sleeve. "Maybe," she began, then stopped. He turned to her. "Maybe what?" Her hand withdrew quickly. "Maybe I should go somewhere else. I don't want trouble." There it was again. Not fear of the cold, not fear of hunger, fear of being a burden. Fear so carefully planted it had begun to grow in her own voice. Beckett kept his tone low. "You're not trouble. You don't know that yet. I know enough." Her eyes lowered. Mica stepped between the seats and rested his chin gently on the edge of her shoulder. Miriam closed her eyes. Sometimes a dog could say what a man would ruin by explaining. Inside the motel office, a bell above the door gave a tired jingle. The room smelled of pine cleaner, coffee gone thick on a burner, and old carpet that had heard too many weather complaints. Behind the counter stood a woman in her mid-60s with short white curls, a round face, and sharp hazel eyes that missed very little. She was short and solidly built, wrapped in a thick burgundy cardigan buttoned wrong at the top, with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her name tag read Rita Snow. Rita looked at Beckett first, taking in the square jaw, the clean-shaven face, the military posture he could not quite shed. Then she looked at Miriam's thin coat, her raw hands, the way she stood half a step behind him. Finally, she looked at Mica. The dog sat without being told. Rita nodded once, as if that settled the character of the entire party. "Room 9, she said before Beckett asked. "End of the row. Heater sounds like an insulted goose, but it works." Beckett took out his wallet. "Thank you." Rita slid the key across the counter. "Don't thank me until the goose starts honking." Her voice was dry as a pine branch, but her eyes had softened when they returned to Miriam. "There's soup in the back," Rita added. "Real soup, not machine soup. I made too much because I cannot estimate vegetables like a reasonable citizen." Miriam's face tightened with the painful weight of kindness. "That's very generous," Beckett said. Rita waved a hand. "Generous is when you give away something you wanted. I'm sick of looking at it." Room 9 was small, warm, and tired. The bedspread had faded blue squares. The curtains were tan and too short by an inch. One lamp leaned on the nightstand like an old sailor. The heater under the window rattled, clanked, paused dramatically, then released a stream of warm air as if offended by its own usefulness. Miriam stood just inside the doorway. Mica entered first, inspected the room, sniffed the bottom of the door, then lay down between the bed and the entrance, his body angled naturally toward any threat that might come through the room. Even retired, even far from any official mission, he remained a guard. Beckett set the hand pies on the small table. The box had softened where snowmelt had touched it. Then he placed the wrapped scarf beside it. Miriam looked at the bed as if she had forgotten what permission felt like. "You can sit," Beckett said gently. "I know." But she did not move, so he pulled the chair out and sat first, giving her the room to choose without being watched too closely. After a moment, she lowered herself onto the edge of the mattress. The movement was careful, the way older bodies negotiate with pain. Her hands found one another in her lap. One thumb rubbed across the other palm, as if she were trying to erase bleach from skin that had already paid for it. "It's warm," she said. Beckett looked at the cracked lampshade, the thin towels, the small stain near the bathroom door. Then he looked at her. She meant it. That hurt worse than if she had complained. He pushed the hand pies toward her. Blueberry. Her eyes lifted. From Marla's bluebird crust. Marla's closed years ago. Of course it did. Miriam gave a fragile sigh. Everything waits for a person except the things they expect to wait. Beckett did not know what to do with that, so he opened the box. The smell of blueberries, butter, and sugar rose into the room. For one moment, something old and golden crossed Miriam's face. The woman from his childhood looked out through the worn one. The aunt who could flour a counter, correct a boy's grammar, and threaten a snowstorm for being rude enough to arrive before supper. "You remembered," she said. "I remembered the pies. You remembered enough to start with." He swallowed. There were apologies so large that the mouth could not hold them. Miriam touched one hand pie but did not take it. Instead, her eyes drifted to the wrapped scarf. Beckett picked it up. "I got this for you. 2 towns south." The woman at the shop said it was warm without being ugly. That is a bold claim in winter clothing. She seemed confident. Miriam's fingers brushed the brown paper. She did not unwrap it yet. Soft things, Beckett realized, could be harder to accept than shelter. A person who had been living on scraps of dignity did not immediately know what to do with gifts. Rita knocked once and entered with 2 foam containers, and a stack of crackers balanced under her chin. She moved with brisk, practical authority, the kind of woman who had spent decades refusing to let sorrow make her inefficient. "Chicken and rice," she said, "unless you hate chicken, rice, or surviving." Miriam opened her mouth, probably to apologize. Rita pointed a plastic spoon at her. "No apologies to soup. Soup has heard worse." Against all odds, Miriam almost laughed. Beckett took the containers. "Thank you, Mom." "Rita," she corrected. "Mom is for women who did not once back a snowplow into a police cruiser." Beckett paused. Rita's eyes narrowed. It was parked stupidly. Mica's ears flicked. Miriam made a sound then, very small, almost a cough, almost a laugh. It lasted less than a second, but Beckett felt it as if someone had opened a window in a sealed room. Rita saw it too. She softened, but only for a breath. "I'll be in the office if the goose dies," she said, and left. They ate in silence for a while. Miriam managed only a few spoonfuls. Beckett did not push. Pushing had never helped a frightened person feel safe. He had learned that in war. He was ashamed to realize he had forgotten it with family. The snow tapped against the window. The heater rattled. Mica breathed steadily by the door. After a long time, Miriam reached inside her coat. Beckett noticed how her hand hesitated near the lining, as if the gesture itself was secret. "I kept something," she said. He set his spoon down. From inside a torn seam, she pulled out a small tin box that had once held peppermint candies. Its red paint was scratched nearly silver at the edges. A faded wreath decorated the lid. Miriam held it in both hands. "I don't understand all of it," she said, "but some part of me knew if I threw it away they would win twice." She handed it to him. Beckett opened the lid carefully. Inside were small pieces of a broken life pretending to be trash. A folded receipt from Pinebridge Elder Stewardship for a winter-safe repair review. A letter addressed in his own handwriting, stamped and restamped, with a red mark across the front, "Manage Correspondence." A torn blue label with the words "Blue Tab Priority." A brass key he recognized at once, old and darkened, from the back door at Heron Point, and a scrap of paper in Miriam's shaky writing. Lighthouse, boxes, blue tabs. Beckett stared at the contents. He had expected tears, confession, maybe panic. He had not expected his aunt to hand him evidence from the lining of a ruined coat. Miriam looked ashamed of even that. "I thought maybe I was being foolish," she whispered. "Old women save odd things, receipts, keys, buttons from coats nobody owns anymore." "No." Beckett's voice was quiet. This was smart. She flinched slightly at the word, as if praise had become a language she no longer trusted. Mica rose from the door and came to the table. He lowered his nose toward the tin, sniffing once, then again. His attention fixed not on the key or the receipt, but on the torn blue label. He gave a low sound deep in his chest, not a growl exactly. Recognition. Beckett lifted the label. "What is it, boy?" Mica pressed his nose briefly to Miriam's coat sleeve. There it was again, bleach, cold wool, old paper. The same smell from the lighthouse shed. For a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. Mica touched the blue label with his nose, then turned and pressed the metal tag on his collar against Miriam's knee. The tag gave a tiny click. "Bring them home." Beside it, the label read, "Blue Tab Priority." One piece of metal had been made by love. The other had been made by people who sorted human beings like files. Miriam looked down at both, and the color left her face. "I saw that color on the boxes," she whispered. "At the lighthouse. Not one box, Beckett. A whole wall of them." Beckett put the label back into the tin and closed the lid. Not because he wanted to stop looking, because his hands had begun to shake and he did not want Miriam to see. He had been trained to process shock by turning it into action. But this was different. These were not enemy coordinates or a hostage map. This was his aunt's life reduced to a system of colors, fees, signatures, and silence. "Start from the beginning," he said. Miriam drew the wrapped scarf into her lap, still unopened, and held it like a shield. "It began at church," she said. "Not during service. In the hall downstairs, they called it Winter Safe Home Lunch." Her voice steadied as she described it, though every sentence carried splinters. The church hall had smelled of coffee, soup, and floor wax. There had been blue tablecloths, brochures stacked beside white paper cups, and young volunteers with bright smiles. Most of the people there were older, some widowed, some alone, some proud enough to pretend they had come only for the free lunch and not because winter had a way of making every bill look larger. Pinebridge Elder Stewardship had presented itself as a local support program for seniors. They spoke about roof weight, frozen pipes, insurance requirements, rising lakefront taxes, missed mail, medical appointments, and how easily older homeowners could lose control of their property, simply because no one explained the paperwork in time. "That was the wicked part," Miriam said. "They didn't start with lies, they started with things we were already afraid of." Then came Laurel Fenwick. Miriam described her carefully, and Beckett saw the woman without needing to meet her. Laurel Fenwick was 47, elegant, polished, and calm in the way expensive rooms were calm. She had dark blonde hair arranged in soft waves, pale skin that looked cared for rather than fragile, and eyes that seemed to understand people before they finished speaking. She wore cream-colored blazers, pale blue silk blouses, and a small silver pin shaped like a pine branch. Her smile was warm enough to enter a lonely person's defenses without knocking. "She called me Mrs. Calloway," Miriam said. "Not Miri, not dear Mrs. Calloway. It made me feel." She looked down, respected. Beckett felt the trap tighten in the telling. Laurel had remembered that Miriam liked blueberry pies. She had known Beckett was military and often away. She had praised Miriam for raising him. She had said people who spent their lives caring for others often failed to protect themselves. She made it sound like accepting help was the responsible thing, Miriam said. Like refusing would be pride. Mica lay down beside her feet, but his eyes remained open. The first form had seemed harmless. Permission for a winter safety review of the home. Pinebridge sent an inspector. A young man in a clean jacket who took pictures of the porch, the old pipes under the kitchen, the furnace, the roofline above the lake-facing wall. He was polite. He wiped his boots before entering. Miriam had trusted that detail more than she wanted to admit. A report followed. Porch instability, heat system vulnerability, possible pipe failure, slip liability, emergency winter exposure risk. It sounded official, Miriam said. I thought if I ignored it and something happened, it would be my fault. Pinebridge offered to coordinate repairs through approved contractors. The costs were high, but Laurel explained there were assistance options. Miriam signed the next form because it was described as temporary billing protection. Then came fees, assessment fees, coordination fees, winter hazard response fees, document preparation fees, reserve account fees. Beckett's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Miriam's hands folded and unfolded the edge of the scarf wrapping. They said the charges could be managed through a property lien, she said. I asked what that meant. They said it was common, safe, only paperwork. They said it protected the house from immediate collection. She gave a bitter little breath. Imagine that. I signed because they used the word protected. Beckett thought of Heron Point under snow, the porch, the missing chair, the strangers in the living room. What about the mail, he asked. Miriam's eyes closed. That came next. Pinebridge had offered mail care authorization for seniors who might miss important notices during storms, hospital visits, or confusion over legal documents. They said duplicate mail would be sent to their office. They would help sort urgent bills from junk. They would make sure nothing important slipped through cracks. At first I was grateful, Miriam said. Your letters still came, then fewer, then sometimes they had marks on them. Forwarded, held, returned. I thought maybe you were busy. Then I thought maybe I had waited too long to answer and you had stopped trying. The sentence landed heavily. Beckett took the letter from the tin. His own handwriting looked back at him from months ago, maybe longer. He remembered writing it in a barracks room under bad fluorescent light, trying to sound casual, trying not to say that some nights he dreamed of the ferry accident though he had not been there when it happened. I wrote, he said. I know that now. I should have called more. Miriam's eyes opened. Yes. The honesty struck cleaner than comfort. Then she reached for his hand. But they helped build the silence, Beckett. You did not build it alone. He lowered his head. For years, Beckett had believed discipline meant carrying blame without complaint. Miriam had always known better. Sometimes blame was a stone. Sometimes it was a chain someone else had locked around your ankle while calling it jewelry. She continued. After mail care came the protected home account. Pinebridge said Beckett's money could be placed there to ensure repairs, taxes, and insurance were paid properly. Miriam agreed because she wanted his transfers to go toward the house. She wanted to prove she was being responsible. The money vanished slowly, not in one dramatic theft, but through small, clean words. Processing, management, consultation, reserve, compliance, withdrawal penalty. Each amount looked almost reasonable by itself. Miriam said, "That was how they made it feel like my fault. A thief with a crowbar at least lets you know you've been robbed. These people made me sign receipts for the robbery." Beckett stood and walked to the window. Outside, snow crossed the red motel light in drifting lines. His reflection stared back at him. Clean-shaven, square-jawed, built for force, useless against what had already happened. He had kicked down doors for strangers. He had crossed oceans for missions marked classified. But his aunt had been trapped in paperwork 3 miles from a bakery that still sold blueberry pies. And he had not known, because he had not wanted to know too closely. Behind him, Miriam spoke again, softer. "I thought if you came home and saw what I'd done, it would prove I wasn't the woman who raised you anymore." Beckett turned. That was the deepest wound, not the money, not even the house. Pinebridge had convinced Miriam that being harmed had changed the truth of who she was. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, not like a soldier receiving orders, like the boy he had once been, sitting on her kitchen floor with shoes untied, furious at Lace's grief and gravity. "You are the woman who raised me," he said. She shook her head, tears gathering. "You fed me when I wouldn't ask. You sat outside my bedroom door when I refused to come out. You taught me how to hold a hammer, how to scrub a pan, how to stop acting like every kind person was trying to poison me." Miriam's mouth twitched through tears. "You were suspicious of casseroles. I was right to be suspicious of Mrs. Henley's tuna bake. That was not food. That was a church experiment." A laugh escaped him, rough and short. Miriam laughed too, though it broke halfway into a sob. The moment did not fix anything. It only let air into the room. Sometimes that was the first mercy. Beckett took her cold hands carefully. "They did not make you less Miriam," he said. "They made a plan around your goodness. That is not your shame. It is theirs." Miriam bent forward, her forehead nearly touching his shoulder. Mica rose and placed his head across their joined hands. The dog's amber eyes closed, as if sealing a vow no court had yet recognized. For a long while they stayed that way. Later, Rita knocked again and left extra blankets without entering. She also left a thermos of coffee with a note taped to it. "Bad coffee, loyal intentions." Beckett almost smiled. Miriam finally unwrapped the scarf. It was cream-colored wool, soft and simple. She ran her fingers over it as though relearning the language of being given something without a hidden fee attached. "It's too nice," she said. "No, it isn't. You always did argue badly when emotional. I've improved. You have not." She wrapped the scarf around her shoulders. For the first time since he found her, Beckett saw a hint of the woman who used to stand on the Heron Point porch with her hands on her hips, daring winter to try harder. The night deepened. Miriam drifted in and out of exhausted sleep. When she stirred, Mica lifted his head. Once she whispered, "The boxes had blue labels." Another time, "I thought the letters stopped because you stopped needing me." Beckett sat in the chair beside the small table with the tin box open before him. Receipt, forwarded letter. Blue tab priority, old key, Lighthouse, boxes, blue tabs. He did not touch the pieces again. He only looked at them until they stopped being scraps and became a pattern. By dawn, the sky beyond the motel curtains had turned pale silver. The heater still rattled, stubborn and imperfect. Miriam woke with the scarf around her shoulders and embarrassment in her eyes, as if needing rest were another failure. Beckett handed her terrible motel coffee. She took it in both hands. "I don't want you to fight everyone," she said. "I'm not planning to." She gave him a look. He sighed. "I'm planning to listen first. That would be new for a Calloway man. Might be historic." Miriam looked at the tin box on the table. "What if I signed too much?" she asked. "Then we find out what you signed. What if it was legal? Legal and right are not always the same animal." Mica gave a low huff from the floor. Miriam looked down at him. "He agrees. He has strong views on contract law. Good. Someone in this room should." The faint humor faded. Miriam reached toward the tin but stopped before touching it. "The blue labels," she said. "I saw them in the Lighthouse storage room. On boxes. A whole row. I didn't know what they meant. I was mopping. They told me not to touch anything. Beckett felt the cold clarity return. Not rage, not yet, something more useful. He took out his phone and photographed each item in the tin, carefully, with the motel table beneath them and Miriam's permission spoken aloud. He did not move the evidence more than necessary. He did not promise miracles. He did not promise the house by sunset. He had learned enough in the night to know that paperwork monsters did not die from one sword swing. But they did leave tracks. Miriam watched him. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Starting where they thought you were too ashamed to start." He placed the old key beside the blue label. The key had opened a home. The label had marked a target. Between them lay the distance Pinebridge had forced Miriam to travel, from woman to file, from aunt to asset, from porch light to priority code. Beckett looked at Mica. The German shepherd sat up, ears forward, metal tag resting against his chest. Bring them home. Beckett finally understood that the words were not only a command for the dog, they were a judgment on him, and maybe, if he was brave enough to stay, a way back. By morning, Snowbright Harbor looked forgiven. Fresh snow had fallen during the last dark hours, covering tire tracks, sidewalk stains, and the hard edges of the motel parking lot. The world outside Room 9 appeared clean enough to make a person doubt what had happened the night before. Lake Superior glimmered beyond the road in pale blue light. Pine branches sagged under white frost. A few gulls wheeled over the harbor, crying into the cold as if they had complaints older than the town itself. Beckett Calloway stood outside the motel room with bad coffee in one hand and Miriam's old brass key in the other. He had slept less than an hour. Miriam was still inside, wrapped in the cream wool scarf, sitting on the edge of the bed with a paper cup of coffee between her palms. Rita Snow had promised to check on her without making it sound like checking. The motel owner had called it walking past with purpose, which was apparently different from worrying. Mica sat beside Beckett's boot, black and tan coat brushed with snow, ears forward, eyes fixed on the road into town. The German shepherd had rested only in fragments. Whenever Miriam shifted in the night, he had lifted his head. Whenever a truck passed outside, one ear had turned toward the door. Age had silvered the edge of his muzzle, but it had not softened his vigilance. Beckett looked down at him. "We listen first." Mica gave him a brief glance, as if listening was obvious, and humans were always late to understanding it. That morning, Beckett did not drive to Pinebridge Elder Stewardship. He knew better. A man with his build, his face, and his history walking into a polished office with rage under his skin would be a gift to people like Laurel Fenwick. They would not need to defeat him. They would only need to frame him. A former Navy SEAL storming a senior assistance organization would look exactly like the story they wanted to tell. So he began where Miriam had gone when pride would not let her say she had nowhere else. He began with warmth. Harbor Light Library stood near the town square, a small brick building with tall windows facing the lake. Snow clung to the ledges. A bronze plaque beside the door named some long-dead donor who had believed books could civilize winter. Inside, the air smelled of paper, old wood, floor polish, and the weak coffee that lived in every public building brave enough to remain open through February. Jessa Pruitt stood behind the front desk. Beckett had seen her briefly the day before, but morning light made her easier to read. She was 58, thin as a bookmark, with ash-brown hair threaded silver and pinned into a low knot at the back of her neck. Wire-rimmed glasses rested on a narrow nose. Her long olive cardigan hung from her shoulders like a quiet apology. Jessa had the face of a woman who had spent her life lowering her voice for other people's comfort, then one day discovered she had lowered it too far to hear herself. When she saw Beckett and Mica enter, her hand tightened around the date stamp. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "you remember me now." Color rose faintly in her cheeks. Snowbright Harbor remembers everyone eventually. It just pretends not to at first. That a town policy? A survival habit. Mica moved before Beckett could ask anything. The dog crossed the reading room with steady purpose, passing shelves of mysteries, large print westerns, and local history books. He stopped beside a wooden chair near the old black stove. The chair's right arm was worn smooth, the cushion slightly sunken, the floor beneath it scuffed by many careful feet. Mica lowered his head and placed his muzzle on the armrest. Jessa's face changed, not dramatically, no gasp, no confession, only a small collapse around the eyes like a roof taking on water. She sat there, Beckett said. Jessa looked toward the front windows. Outside, a woman in a red coat hurried past with her head down against the cold. "Miriam liked the stove," Jessa said. "Liked?" The librarian swallowed. "She came in on mornings when it was below freezing, sometimes before we officially opened. I told myself she enjoyed the quiet." "You told yourself?" Jessa flinched, but did not deny it. Mica remained at the chair, Amber eyes lifted toward her. Jessa folded her hands on the desk. Her fingers were pale, the knuckles a little swollen, a silver ring turning loosely on one finger. She said she was waiting for the bus. Then she said she was reading. Then she stopped inventing reasons and I stopped asking for them. Beckett's jaw tightened. She slept here? Once. Jessa paused. No, that is what cowards say when they want the smaller truth. More than once. The room hummed with the old stove and fluorescent lights. She held her tote bag the whole time, Jessa continued, even asleep, like someone might take the last proof she still had a life. Beckett thought of the tin box hidden inside Miriam's coat. Little proofs, receipts, a key, a letter that never properly arrived. Why didn't anyone call me, he asked. The question came out calm, too calm. Jessa looked at him then. Behind her fear there was shame. Pinebridge sent letters to the library board, to the church office, to businesses. They said public speculation about program participants could violate privacy and damage ongoing property recovery efforts. Property recovery, Beckett repeated, her mouth twisted. They have beautiful words for ugly things. Mica lifted his muzzle from the chair and sniffed along the seam between cushion and wood. Then he nosed something wedged deep beneath the cushion. Beckett crouched and pulled it free. A small paper bus transfer bent and soft from age. On the back, in Miriam's handwriting, were 3 words, "Tell him later." Beckett stared at it. Jessa covered her mouth. She wrote notes sometimes, the librarian whispered, on scraps, receipts, programs, margins of newspapers. I thought it was forgetfulness. Beckett closed his hand around the transfer. It was not evidence in any court. Not really. Only a sentence from a woman trying to postpone shame one more day. Tell him later. Later had become a house with strangers in it. As Beckett stood, Mica suddenly stepped away from the chair and turned toward the library's local history wall. The dog did not bark. He did not growl. He simply sat in front of an old framed photograph of Heron Point from 40 years earlier. The picture showed the White House, Miriam much younger on the porch, and a boy on the steps with a scowl too large for his small face. Beckett. Someone had tucked a fresh Pinebridge flyer into the frame's lower corner, half hidden behind the glass edge. Across the bottom of the flyer, in elegant blue type, was a phrase that made Beckett's stomach harden. Preserving the homes that built us. Mica looked from the old photograph to Beckett. For one breath, the past and the lie stood in the same frame. Jessa removed the flyer with trembling fingers. I didn't put that there, she said. I believe you. I should have taken it down sooner. You didn't know what it meant. Her eyes shone. I knew enough to feel dirty looking at it. Beckett folded the flyer and put it with the bus transfer. Feeling dirty is not the same as being guilty. Jessa looked toward the chair. Tell that to everyone in this town. He left the library with 2 new pieces of truth. Miriam had sought warmth there, and Pinebridge had planted its language in the very places that held the town's memory. His next stop was Blue Heron Diner. The diner sat near the harbor road, its windows fogged from grills, coffee steam, and bodies glad to be indoors. A blue heron painted on the sign looked too elegant for a place that smelled of bacon grease, wet wool, and old conversations. Inside, truckers bent over plates of eggs. 2 fishermen argued quietly about ice thickness. A radio played a country song low enough to sound embarrassed. Behind the counter stood Della Marwick, the owner. She was around 60, broad-hipped and strong-armed, with copper-red hair fading to gray at the temples and skin browned by years of grill heat and lake wind. Her apron was flour-smudged. A pencil had been stabbed through the knot of hair at the back of her head. Della had the tired, maternal face of a woman who could feed half a town and still deny being kind because kindness sounded too expensive. She recognized Beckett after 3 seconds. Calloway boy, she said. You got tall. I was tall the last time I was here. Not to me. Everyone under 40 is 12 until proven otherwise. Her eyes dropped to Mica. And that dog knows exactly where he is going, doesn't he? Mica walked past the stools and stopped near the swinging kitchen door. He circled once, then lowered himself beside a crate of onions near the back wall. Della's lips pressed together. That was her corner, Beckett said. Della wiped her hands on her apron too hard. She rested there sometimes. After washing dishes, the diner sounds seemed to dim. Della leaned on the counter. The joking armor remained on her face, but it had cracked. She said she wanted something to do. Said idle hands made her think too much. I paid her cash because she asked me to. I gave her dinner too. Before you ask, yes, I knew that meant she needed it. And yes, I have already had that argument with God several times, and he has not been gentle. Beckett said nothing. There were accusations he did not have the right to make, because they would land on everyone, including himself. Della pointed a finger at him. Don't you stand there looking like judgment in boots. I wasn't. You were considering it. I was considering myself first. That stopped her. Della's shoulders lowered. Good. Saves me from throwing a biscuit at you. Mica thumped his tail once, perhaps in favor of biscuits. Della came around the counter and crouched near him. You remember me, don't you? Mica sniffed her hand and accepted one scratch behind the ear. He used to come in with Miriam when he was a younger menace, Della said. Stole a sausage link once. Looked me dead in the eye while doing it. He denies all charges, Beckett said. Of course he does. Handsome criminals always do. For a moment, the diner felt almost normal. Then Della stood and pulled a small envelope from beneath the register. It had no stamp, no address, only Miriam's name written in Della's blocky hand. I meant to give this back, she said. She left it one night. I kept thinking she'd come in again. Beckett opened it. Inside was $37 in folded bills and a diner receipt. On the receipt, Miriam had written a list of items: milk, furnace filter, dog biscuits, stamps. The word stamps had been crossed out so hard the paper nearly tore. Beckett understood the wound beneath that single crossed-out word. Mail had become dangerous. Did Pinebridge come here? He asked. Della looked toward the window. A man did, polite. Expensive boots. Said Miriam was under a property transition plan and that people helping her outside approved channels might interfere with her case. What did you say? I told him this was a diner, not a channel. Despite himself, Beckett almost smiled. Then he mentioned my building loan, Della said, not directly. Men like that never put the knife where a witness can see it. He asked if the bank was still being patient with me. Her face hardened. So yes, I got scared. Not proud of it, but pride does not pay suppliers. Beckett folded the receipt carefully. You are telling me now, late. Late is not never. Della studied him. Miriam say that? She taught me the shape of it. When Beckett left, Della packed 2 breakfast sandwiches without asking and handed him a paper bag. For her, she said. And if she apologizes, tell her I'll come over there and commit a casserole. Beckett nodded. That threat may work. Outside, the cold had brightened. The sky was a hard winter blue. Snow squeaked under Beckett's boots as he walked toward the truck. Mica paused by the passenger door, looking north toward the harbor road. Not done? Beckett asked. The dog's ears lifted. They drove toward the old boatyard. The road followed the lake for a mile, then turned past stacked docks, shrink-wrapped boats, and sheds with roofs bowed by snow. Beyond a rusted chain-link fence stood the remains of Brandt Marine Repair. The sign had been taken down, but its shadow remained on the wall, pale letters haunting darker wood. A man was working beside a half-open storage building, trying to coax life into an engine mounted on a stand. Otis Brandt was 69, tall in the way old pines are tall, with a body bent by years under boat hulls and a face carved from weather, grease, and disappointment. His beard was silver and uneven, his jaw still strong beneath it. He wore a brown work jacket, a red and black flannel shirt, dark work pants, and boots that had lost any right to remain waterproof. His hands were large, cracked, and permanently stained with oil. Without looking up, he said, "If you're selling something, I hope it's patience because I'm low." Beckett Calloway. The wrench stopped. Otis turned. His pale eyes narrowed. Miriam's boy, nephew, boy if she raised you. Beckett accepted that. Mica stepped forward. Otis looked down at the dog and something in his thorny face loosened. Well, I'll be cursed, he muttered. That the dish towel thief? Different charge, Beckett said. Sausage theft today, possibly towel theft in the past. Mica sat dignified and deeply unhelpful to his own defense. Otis crouched with a grunt and held out one hand. Mica sniffed it, then allowed the old man to scratch behind his ear. Still thinks he owns every room, Otis said. He usually does. Otis stood slowly. Come in before I become neighborly by accident. Inside the storage building, heat came from a small propane heater fighting a losing but honorable war. The space smelled of oil, metal, rope, mouse droppings, and old coffee. Shelves sagged under parts, filters, bolts, carburetors, and labeled jars. The place was not messy. It was a private language spoken in metal. Otis cleared a spot on a workbench and pulled out a green notebook wrapped in a rubber band. I wondered when someone would ask the right kind of question, he said. What kind is that? Not what happened to your place. People ask that when they want a sad story. The right question is, who came before it happened? He opened the notebook. Pages were filled with dates, times, license plates, initials, locations. Pinebridge van, Church Hall, Renshaw Bank side door, Pell Legal, White's SUV, storage pickup near Heron Point, Dace property evaluation, Calloway winter review. Beckett felt the pattern tighten. You kept all this? Otis tapped the notebook. Lost the shop. Didn't feel like losing my mind too. Paper makes grief stand still long enough to point at it. He turned a page and stopped at Miriam's name. M. Calloway, winter review. Pinebridge woman present, contractor truck. Porch photos, mail service packet, looked sick after bank. Beckett read the line twice. Pinebridge took your shop? Took is a crude word. They prefer converted. Otis's mouth twisted. Debt relief conversion. Business continuity support. Community redevelopment alignment. They can hide a body in a phrase and still make it sound like a grant. What did they want with a repair shop? Land access. Shoreline service road. Otis looked around the storage building. Same thing they want from everyone. Not the building. The place where it stands. That sentence followed Beckett outside even before he left. Not the building. The place where it stands. Before Beckett returned to the truck, Otis mentioned Lenora Dace. She had cranberry land north of town, he said. Widow. Proud. Wore purple gloves to church because she said black made God think you'd given up. Pinebridge moved her out for a water safety evaluation. Land showed up on a development sketch before her coffee maker got cold. Where is she now? With a cousin in Marquette, last I heard. Calls nobody. Shame does that. Makes a locked room out of a person. Beckett thanked him. Otis snorted. Don't thank me. Do something useful with it. Back in town, afternoon light had begun to turn golden on the snow. Beckett drove slowly along Main Street, past the bakery, the diner, the library, the church, and the small town hall. Now that he knew how to look, Pinebridge was everywhere. A flyer near the grocery, a sponsorship plaque in the library window, a tasteful banner outside the church, a donation note on the festival board, not a criminal hiding in an alley, a promise sitting politely at every table. Mica pressed his nose to the truck window as they passed the town hall. Then he gave a single low sound. Beckett parked. Workers had recently installed a glass-covered display beside the entrance. Behind it was a large poster for Aurora Walk. At first glance, it was beautiful. A lakeside boardwalk curved along Superior beneath warm lanterns. Boutique cabins sat among pines. A restored lighthouse glowed in the background. A winter garden shimmered under glass. Older couples smiled beneath string lights, holding paper cups, wrapped in scarves that looked expensive but not warm. The town in the poster had no rust, no hungry people, no old women sleeping near stoves, no dishes washed for cash, no repair shop full of ghosts. At the bottom was a map. Beckett leaned closer. The houses along Heron Point had been reduced to numbered shapes. Lot H11, Lot H14, Lot H16. Then his eyes stopped. Lot H19, Miriam's house, the white house that had held his worst childhood years until they became survivable. The porch where Miriam had left a light on. The kitchen where she had forced him to eat eggs, while grief told him he was too angry for breakfast. The back door key still in her tin box. On the map, it was only a clean square. Beckett studied the lines. Aurora Walk's boardwalk curved from the harbor, past the restored lighthouse, through the winter garden, then along Heron Point. At Lot H19, the line narrowed. Without that property, the path broke. The view corridor failed. The access from lighthouse to shore cabins lost its symmetry. Miriam had not been incidental. Her home was the hinge. A truck passed behind Beckett. Somewhere a man laughed. A bell chimed from the bakery. Life continued with obscene ease. He took out his phone and photographed the poster from 3 angles. He captured the logo, the map, the legend, the small text beneath the rendering. As he lowered the phone, he saw a line printed in fine, pale letters near the bottom. Phase 1 access begins in 7 days. Beckett stood very still. The phrase was clean. The meaning was not. 7 days until the path began taking shape. 7 days until the town watched progress and called it beautiful. 7 days until Heron Point became less a home and more a gap to be filled. Mica sat beside him in the snow, ears forward, body steady. Beckett looked at the dog. She wasn't chosen because she was weak, he said. Mica's amber eyes stayed on the map. Beckett folded the flyer from the library, the diner receipt, and Otis's copied page into his jacket pocket. Warmth from his body pressed against the paper, as if evidence too could be kept alive. She was chosen because her house stood in the way. The wind moved along Main Street, lifting loose snow into the air. The flakes spun between Beckett and the glass poster, briefly hiding the beautiful future Pinebridge had drawn. Then the wind shifted. The map appeared again. Lot H19 waited at the center of it, small, numbered, and silent. But now Beckett knew its real name, home. Beckett Calloway did not wear the tactical shirt to the Pinebridge presentation. That decision cost him more than it should have. The old olive-gray combat shirt lay folded on the motel chair, its shoulders and cuffs frayed from years of service, its fabric familiar to his hands. It belonged to a life where danger had shape, direction, and sound. A man could read that kind of danger. He could hear it in a radio crackle, see it in a doorway, smell it in burned dust and metal. But tonight, danger would smell like coffee and butter cookies. It would smile beneath warm lights. It would say community while hiding the word possession behind its teeth. Beckett stood in room 9 of Sunrise Motor Court, looking at himself in the narrow mirror above the sink. He wore a gray wool sweater under a dark canvas jacket, jeans, and his worn brown work boots. His black military watch remained on his left wrist, its scratched face catching the yellow bathroom light. He had not removed that. He was willing to leave the uniform behind, not the discipline. Behind him, Miriam sat on the edge of the bed with the cream scarf around her shoulders. The scarf made her look less like a woman rescued from a freezing maintenance shed and more like the aunt who used to stand at the stove with flour on one cheek, pretending not to worry. Her silver-white hair had been combed back with Rita's spare brush. The raw places on her hands had been covered with ointment. Still, her eyes followed every move Beckett made. "You look like you're going to church with a grudge," she said. He adjusted his jacket. "Better than going to war in public." That is not a denial. It was not meant to be. Mica sat by the door, the 7-year-old German shepherd alert and quiet, his black saddle and warm tan chest bright against the motel's faded carpet. His amber brown eyes moved between Beckett and Miriam. The worn brown collar rested against his thick neck and the small metal tag hung still. "Bring them home." Miriam looked at the dog. "He knows you're leaving him behind. He'll stay in the truck, heater on, window cracked, water in the floorboard." That was not the objection. Mica huffed once. Beckett sighed. "I know, his legal counsel has spoken." The faint smile on Miriam's face faded as quickly as it came. "Be careful." He turned from the mirror. The words were simple, but underneath them stood a whole cathedral of fear. She was not only afraid he might be hurt, she was afraid he might become the kind of man Pinebridge could point to. Angry, loud, dangerous, easy to dismiss. Beckett understood. That was why he had changed clothes. "I'm going to listen," he said. Miriam's fingers tightened around the edge of the scarf. "They're good at making people feel foolish for doubting them. Then I'll be foolish quietly." That would be historic for a Calloway man. He almost smiled. "You already used that line." "It remains true." Before he left, he placed Miriam's tin box in the drawer beside the bed, wrapped inside a clean towel. He had photographed every item with her permission, but the box itself mattered to her. It was not only evidence. It was proof that some part of her had refused to be erased. Rita Snow appeared in the doorway as Beckett stepped out. She held a mug of coffee in one hand and wore the same burgundy cardigan, now with dish towel over one shoulder like a general's sash. Snow dusted her white curls. Her sharp hazel eyes flicked from Beckett to Mica. "You going to that Pinebridge circus?" she asked. "Presentation? Same animal. Better chairs. I won't be long." Rita snorted. "That's what men say before spending 3 hours pretending they are not furious." Miriam called from inside. "He has improved." Rita looked at Beckett. "Has he?" "No." Mica's expression seemed to answer. Rita handed Beckett the mug. "Take this. Bad coffee." Loyal intentions. He accepted it. "You keep making that sound like a brand. Better than half the brands in town." The Snowbright Harbor Cultural Center sat near the town hall, a low stone building with tall windows and a roofline softened by snow. White lanterns hung along the walkway. A blue carpet runner had been laid over the salted steps. Through the glass doors, Beckett could see warm light, flowers, moving bodies, and the clean performance of civic optimism. He parked at the far edge of the lot where the truck faced the exit. Old habit. Mica watched the building through the windshield. "You stay," Beckett said. The German shepherd turned his head slowly, amber eyes unimpressed. "I know." Official protest received. Beckett left the engine running low, heat steady, window cracked 2 inches. He set a bowl of water on the floorboard and touched the leather collar at Mica's neck. The tag shifted beneath his fingers. "Bring them home." "Not yet," Beckett murmured. "Tonight we learn how they talk." Inside, the lobby smelled of brewed coffee, polished floors, winter coats, and expensive paper. A young volunteer stood near the entrance holding a basket of name tags. He was in his mid-20s, lanky and pale, with sandy blonde hair combed too carefully and nervous red patches along his neck. His name tag read Even Rill. He wore a Pinebridge vest over a white shirt and had the anxious posture of someone who had joined a cause because the brochure looked noble. "Name?" Evan asked. "N. Calloway," Beckett said. He did not know why he gave only an initial. Perhaps because Beckett felt too personal in that room. Evan wrote quickly, then hesitated. His eyes moved to Beckett's face, down to the black watch, then back up. "You from here?" the young man asked. Once. Something flickered in Evan's expression. Recognition, maybe. Or fear of recognition. Before Beckett could read it, a woman behind him laughed brightly, and Evan's face closed. "Enjoy the presentation," he said. The main hall had been dressed like a promise. White flowers stood in glass vases on round tables. Pale blue tablecloths matched the Pinebridge logo. Coffee steamed beside plates of butter cookies and neatly arranged brochures. On a large screen at the front of the room, a silver pine branch curved over the words, Pinebridge Elder Stewardship. A warmer future for the North Shore. The phrase made Beckett think of Miriam's raw hands and the library chair by the stove. He moved along the side wall. In the back corner stood a man with a small camera mounted on a stabilizer. Owen Slade was in his early 40s, slim, neat, and too aware of his own angles. He had light brown hair brushed back from a high forehead, a short trimmed beard shaped with almost mathematical care, and pale eyes that did not rest on people so much as arrange them. He wore a navy blazer over a black turtleneck and smiled quickly at anyone who looked useful on camera. Wonderful turnout, Owen said to an elderly couple near the coffee. Just natural smiles, nothing formal. We're capturing community energy. The couple smiled because people often obeyed cameras before they understood why. Beckett watched Owen tilt the lens away from a thin older man standing alone near the exit with worry written across his face. The camera found instead a white-haired woman laughing beside a tray of cookies. Community energy. The words had no blood on them, which made them dangerous. At the far side of the room stood Nora Feltz, a woman Beckett recognized from the partner list he had photographed. Nora looked about 38. With dark auburn hair cut to her chin and tucked behind one ear. She was tall and narrow, wearing a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, and her skin had the pale, tired cast of someone who spent her days under bank lights. Her eyes were green, quick, and worried. She held a paper cup of coffee but had not taken a sip. Every few moments, she looked toward the front row, where a man in a tailored gray suit was speaking with Laurel Fenwick's staff. That man was Grant Pell. He was in his early 50s, tall and angular, with a long face, silver hair combed precisely back, and a narrow mouth that seemed built for correction. He was clean-shaven, polished, and calm in the way locks are calm. His suit fit perfectly. His hands were thin and pale. Grant gave the impression of a man who could turn cruelty into a paragraph so dense that mercy would suffocate before reaching the final clause. Beckett took a brochure from the table. Inside were familiar words wearing fresh clothes. Stewardship, legacy, transition, winter safety, asset protection. He slipped the brochure into the inside pocket of his jacket. The lights dimmed. Owen moved toward the front, camera ready. Laurel Fenwick took the stage. Beckett had heard Miriam describe her, but the real woman made the description feel almost modest. Laurel was 47, elegant and composed, with dark blonde hair falling in disciplined waves to her shoulders. Her cream blazer held a small silver pine branch pin at the lapel. Beneath it, she wore a pale blue silk blouse that caught the light softly. Her face was smooth, intelligent, and warm in the way a locked room can be warm when the fire inside belongs to someone else. Her eyes moved across the room slowly, not scanning, claiming. "Good evening, Snowbright Harbor," she began. Her voice was low, clear, and intimate enough to make a public room feel like a kitchen table. Several older residents leaned forward without realizing it. "Thank you for coming out on a cold night to speak about warmth. Not merely the warmth of better windows or safer roofs, though those matter. I mean the deeper warmth of belonging, of knowing the place you built will not collapse around you simply because time has asked more of your hands than they can give." Beckett felt the room soften. He understood then why Miriam had trusted her. Laurel spoke of storms, rising costs, frozen pipes, isolation, family members serving far away, insurance language too complex for ordinary people, tax burdens, legacy planning. Each point was true enough to stand upright. That was how the lie walked among them. "For too long," Laurel continued, "our elders have been forced to choose between pride and protection. Here at Pinebridge, we believe dignity should not require loneliness. A home should not become a hazard simply because its owner has grown old inside it." A few heads nodded. Beckett thought of Miriam saying, "I signed because they used the word protected." On the screen behind Laurel appeared images of restored cottages, repaired porches, smiling residents, fresh paint, and warm windows. Then came diagrams of Aurora Walk, lantern paths, lakefront benches, winter gardens, accessible ramps, boutique cabins tucked among pines. No one in the images looked ashamed. No one looked hungry. No one had bleach burns on her hands. Laurel did not mention transfers of mail. She did not mention liens. She did not mention protected accounts draining through fees. She spoke instead of guided transition and community continuity. At one point, she said, "Sometimes love for a place means allowing that place to serve more people." Beckett wrote nothing down. His memory did the work. Near the wall, Nora Feltz shifted her weight. Her cup trembled slightly. Grant Pell watched the room, not Laurel. That interested Beckett. Lawyers like Pell did not watch speeches. They watched risk. As Laurel spoke of ethical stewardship, Beckett noticed Evan Rill near the brochure table. The young volunteer's face had gone pale. He was staring not at Laurel, but at an elderly man in the second row whose hands shook around a program booklet. Evan's lips moved once, silently, as if he knew the man's name and wished he did not. Then Evan looked toward Beckett. For one brief second, his eyes were naked with panic. Not guilt. Panic. Before Beckett could move, Owen's camera swung across the room, and Evan instantly lowered his gaze, becoming just another smiling volunteer beside the coffee. Beckett looked back at the stage. For the first time that night, he wondered if Pine Bridge's wall had a crack inside it. When the applause came, it began uncertainly, and then grew stronger because people disliked hearing their own hesitation. Laurel stepped down from the stage and began greeting residents with both hands, touching elbows, remembering names, bending slightly toward those who spoke softly. Owen followed at a careful distance, filming her best angles. Grant Pell stood nearby like a polished gate. Beckett moved through the room collecting what he could without drawing attention. A schedule of upcoming consultations, a partner list, a map insert, a card for North Shore Wellness Review, the remote clinic Miriam had not yet mentioned but whose name sat beside the words medical risk support. He read the card. Dr. Simon Calder, clinical director. The photograph showed a man in his early 50s with silver-brown hair, a square physician's smile, and the kind of clean white coat that existed mainly in advertisements. Beckett did not know yet whether Calder was a fool, a coward, or something worse. He only knew the clinic belonged on the growing map inside his head. As he slid the card into his folder, Laurel approached. "Mr. Calloway, isn't it?" He turned. Her smile was exact, not broad, not cold, exact. "Beckett Calloway," he said. "I thought so. Miriam has spoken of you with great affection." The use of Miriam's first name landed badly. "Has she many times?" "She is a remarkable woman." Laurel tilted her head slightly. "Private, proud. That can make assistance difficult." Beckett gave her nothing. Laurel continued, "I hope she is well." "Do you?" The question was soft. So soft Owen, 5 steps away, leaned his camera almost imperceptibly toward them. Laurel's smile did not change. "Of course." Beckett looked toward the lens, then back at her. "Then we agree on one thing." He stepped away before the exchange could become useful to her. He had almost reached the lobby when Mica barked outside. Once, sharp. The sound cut through glass and conversation. Several heads turned. Then came a second bark, lower, harder. Beckett was already moving. He crossed the lobby, pushed through the doors, and stepped into the cold. The parking lot lay under yellow lamps and falling snow. Exhaust drifted from idling cars. The air smelled of salt, fuel, and winter. Mica stood inside the truck with his front paws braced against the passenger seat, body rigid behind the cracked window. He was not barking wildly now. His ears were high, his eyes fixed toward the rear of the vehicle. A man in a dark coat moved away from the pickup, average height. Knit cap low, shoulders hunched, one hand tucked close to his body. He was trying not to run. Then he saw Beckett. He ran. Beckett did not chase. Every instinct in his body measured distance, footing, angle, speed. He could have reached the man before the far row of cars. He knew the path. He knew where the ice lay under the powder. He knew how to drop a fleeing body without breaking more than necessary. He did none of it. Because Owen Slade might be behind him with a camera. Because Laurel would love nothing more than a former SEAL sprinting across a civic parking lot after an unknown man. Because Miriam had already been used enough. Beckett turned to the truck. Mica's breath fogged the window. The dog gave a low rumble, not at Beckett, but toward the direction the man had fled. "I saw him," Beckett said quietly. He opened the passenger door. Mica immediately pushed his muzzle toward Beckett's sleeve, then the rear tire, then beneath the truck. Beckett crouched. Under the rear frame, near the wheel well, a small black device had been magnetically attached to the metal. New, clean, not part of the truck, a tracker. Beckett removed it carefully with 2 fingers and held it in the light. Mica was not done. The dog scraped once at packed snow under the mud flap. Something pale was caught in the ice. Beckett worked it free. A torn strip of adhesive label. On it were a partial printed code and words written in hurried black ink. "Blue tabs. Ask Nell Bryson." Beckett read it once, then again. The snow seemed to fall more quietly. Mica stood beside him, alert, ears forward, tail still. Someone had followed him. Someone had also warned him. The 2 facts did not fit neatly together. That meant the situation was alive. Behind him, the cultural center doors opened. Voices spilled into the night. A few people looked toward the parking lot. Owen stood just inside the lobby glass, camera lowered but ready. Laurel appeared beside him. For the first time that evening, her face did not fully obey her. The pause lasted less than a second. Then the smile returned. Beckett placed the tracker and the label in an empty coffee cup from his truck, then folded a napkin over the top. Not perfect evidence handling, but better than bare pockets. He photographed the placement under the truck, the device, the strip of label, and the tire tracks near the rear bumper. Then he looked back through the glass at Laurel. He did not glare. He did not challenge. He simply let her see that he had found it. Her eyes held his. A winter battlefield had just drawn its first visible line. He drove back to Sunrise Motor Court without taking the direct route. Twice he turned where he did not need to turn. Once he circled a closed gas station and watched the mirrors. No vehicle followed. Mica remained standing for most of the drive, refusing to settle. At the motel, Rita was in the office window watching. She opened the door before he reached it. "You brought weather with you," she said. "Not the kind you can shovel. Worse then." Room 9 was lit by the bedside lamp. Miriam sat upright, still wearing the scarf, hands folded in her lap. She looked at Beckett's face first, then at the coffee cup in his hand. "What happened?" He set the cup on the table and removed the napkin. The tracker sat like a dead insect. Beside it lay the torn label. Miriam stared. Her face paled, but she did not shrink the way she had the night before. Fear entered her eyes, yes. But behind it stood something new, thin and steady as the first blue line before dawn. Mica went to her and placed his head on her knee. Miriam's hand settled on his collar. Her thumb brushed the metal tag. "Bring them home." Beckett expected her to ask whether they should leave, whether he was in danger, whether this was her fault. Instead, she looked at the label. "Someone wrote that in a hurry," she said. "Yes. Someone close enough to know. Yes." Her hand tightened slightly in Mica's fur. "Then Pine Bridge is not as whole as it pretends." Beckett sat across from her. "No," he said. "It isn't." Miriam looked from the tracker to the torn strip. The heater rattled beneath the window. Outside, the motel sign flickered red through the snow, making the curtains pulse faintly like a tired heart. Finally, Miriam spoke, her voice low but clearer than it had been since the lighthouse. "If they followed you, they are afraid you are finding the road." Beckett said nothing. Miriam's eyes lifted to his. "And if someone risked giving you that name," she continued, "then somewhere inside all this, there is still a soul with a hand on the light switch." Mica raised his head. For a moment, the room held the three of them in a fragile circle. The man who had come home late, the woman learning not to apologize for being harmed, and the dog whose tag had become less a phrase than a command. Beckett looked again at the words on the torn label. "Blue tabs. Ask Nell Bryson." He did not yet know who Nell Bryson was, but for the first time since arriving in Snowbright Harbor, he knew this much. The wall had cracked, and something behind it was afraid of the light. The name Nell Bryson did not belong to any sign in Snowbright Harbor. That was the first thing Beckett Calloway noticed. By sunrise, he had checked the public places where ordinary names usually left small footprints. An old church bulletin board, a town volunteer list pinned near the motel office, a business directory Rita Snow kept in a drawer beneath unpaid postcards and emergency candles. Nell Bryson appeared nowhere recent, not on a storefront, not on a committee list, not in the Pine Bridge brochures that smiled too hard. But Rita remembered her. The motel owner stood behind the counter with a mug of coffee in one hand and a pencil tucked behind one white curl. Morning light fell through the office window, making the dust look almost holy. "Bryson," Rita said, narrowing her sharp hazel eyes. "Nell Bryson. Used to do bookkeeping for half the small businesses that couldn't afford a real accountant and didn't want their cousin touching the numbers. Where is she now?" Beckett asked. Rita looked past him toward room 9, where Miriam was resting with Mica at her feet. "Out by the old cranberry greenhouses," she said. "Kettle Road, North Fork. Yellow house that gave up pretending to be yellow. Husband died a few years back. She got quieter after that." "What kind of quiet?" "The kind that locks the curtains before sunset." Beckett understood that kind. He had seen men come home from war and build their lives around locked rooms. He had seen widows arrange silence like furniture. He had done his own version of it for years, leaving Heron Point untouched in his mind because touching it meant becoming the 9-year-old boy who had once needed Miriam to cut his toast into triangles. Miriam wanted to come with him. She said so while sitting on the edge of the motel bed, wrapped in the cream scarf, her silver white hair brushed back, her pale blue-gray eyes clearer than they had been the first night. The raw skin of her hands was covered in ointment. The tin box sat beside her on the nightstand like a small altar to stubbornness. "I know, Nell," she said, "or I used to." Beckett stopped by the door. Mica lifted his head between them, ears forward, aware that the air had changed. "You're tired," Beckett said. "I am old. That is not the same as useless." "No one said useless. You were arranging the sentence," he sighed. There she was, Not healed, not safe, not restored, but present. I'm not keeping you out, he said. I'm asking whether you want to see someone who may be tied to Pine Bridge before you've had one full night of real sleep. Miriam looked down at her hands. Pride rose in her face, then grief, then something wiser than both. No, she said finally. Not yet. He nodded. Mica stood. Miriam looked at the dog. And you apparently have voted. Mica walked to Beckett's side and sat. That dog always did love a mystery, she murmured. He says it's not love, it's professional obligation. He says a lot for someone with no grammar. Beckett almost smiled. He touched the metal tag on Mica's collar. Bring them home. Then he left before his courage could become tenderness and ask him to stay. The road north of Snowbright Harbor curved away from the lake and into cranberry country. The land opened into low fields sleeping beneath ice and snow. In summer, Beckett remembered, the bogs would have held red fruit like scattered beads. Now they lay white and silent, bordered by dark pines and empty irrigation ditches. Old greenhouses crouched beyond the fields, their glass panes cracked or missing, their metal ribs shining faintly under frost like the bones of some long-dead animal. Nell Bryson's house sat at the end of a gravel lane half buried in snow. It had once been pale yellow. Now weather had washed it toward gray. The porch rail leaned. Plastic sheeting covered one window from the inside. A wreath still hung on the front door, though Christmas had passed weeks ago, its red bow faded by wind and neglect. No tire tracks marked the drive except one narrow path pressed by repeated careful walking. Beckett parked where the house could see him coming. No surprise approach, no pressure. Mica jumped down beside him, strong black and tan body steady in the snow. His nose lifted, reading the air. There was wood smoke, old damp leaves under ice, metal from the greenhouse frames, and the thin, anxious scent of a house that had kept its windows shut too long. Beckett knocked. Nothing moved. He waited, then knocked again. Mrs. Bryson, he called, keeping his voice even. My name is Beckett Calloway. Miriam Calloway is my aunt. A floorboard creaked inside. Then silence. I don't know anything, a woman said from behind the door. Beckett did not move. People who knew nothing rarely began there. I'm not here to scare you. A bitter little laugh came through the wood. Men usually say that from the side with room to leave. He accepted the hit. It was fair. You're right. He stepped back from the porch, down 2 steps into the snow, putting distance between himself and the door. Mica stayed where he was, but lowered into a calm sit, ears erect, eyes steady. The curtain beside the door shifted. A long minute passed. Then the deadbolt clicked. The door opened only a hand's width. Nell Bryson looked out as if daylight might accuse her. She was 64, small and narrow-shouldered, with gray hair cut bluntly at her chin and tucked behind one ear. Her skin was pale and papery, marked by faint brown sunspots along the cheekbones. She had a thin mouth, worried blue eyes, and the careful posture of someone who had spent years trying not to take up too much space. A dark cardigan hung over a faded floral blouse. One sleeve had been darned neatly at the cuff. Everything about her suggested order, restraint, and fear folded into tidy corners. Her gaze moved from Beckett to Mica. The change was immediate. Her hand rose to her mouth. Oh, she whispered. Mica did not move toward her. He only watched. Nell's eyes filled. She used to bring him, she said. Beckett remained still. Miriam? Nell nodded, the door opening another inch. When Martin was bad, she'd come with soup or banana bread. She said sick rooms didn't need dog hair, so he waited on the porch, like a little soldier. Mica tilted his head. Nell made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. He stole one of Martin's slippers. Beckett looked down at him. That sounds like classified misconduct. Mica turned his head away with grave innocence. Nell's mouth trembled. For a moment, the dead man stood between them, not as a ghost to frighten anyone, but as memory does, wearing slippers, laughing weakly in a chair, letting an old dog and an older kindness make one room less cruel. Nell opened the door wider. Come in before I lose my nerve. The house smelled of closed curtains, dust, tea leaves, and paper. Not trash, paper. Envelopes stacked by size, notebooks aligned on shelves, pill bottles labeled and arranged on a tray, receipts bundled with rubber bands. Every flat surface held evidence of a mind trying to keep chaos from spilling over. In the sitting room, a framed photograph rested on the mantel. A thin man with kind eyes smiled from a recliner, a blanket over his knees. He looked ill even in the photograph, but the smile was real. Beside the frame sat one worn brown slipper. Nell saw Beckett notice it. I kept one, she said. The other disappeared into the criminal underworld. Mica glanced toward the mantel, then at Beckett. I'm saying nothing, Beckett told him. They sat in the kitchen. A calculator lay beside the sugar bowl, its gray buttons worn smooth. A tea mug had gone cold near a stack of unopened mail. Nell touched the calculator once before sitting, as if making sure some part of the old world still worked. "I didn't put anything under your truck," she said. Beckett folded his hands on the table. "I didn't ask. But that's why you came." "I came because someone told me to ask you about blue tabs." Nell closed her eyes. The kitchen seemed to grow smaller. Outside, wind moved over the frozen cranberry fields, brushing loose snow against the siding. "I was data reconciliation," she said. The phrase sounded harmless. That made Beckett dislike it immediately. "What does that mean?" "It means I made numbers match categories. Client accounts, repair reviews, winter safety assessments, property transitions, partner transfers." She looked at her hands. People matched categories too. Mica, who had been lying near the back door, lifted his head. Nell's eyes moved to him, then away. "At first," she said, "I told myself it was just administrative work. Pinebridge said older homeowners needed organization. Many did. Paperwork is hard when your eyes are failing or your spouse used to handle everything. I believed that part because I wanted to. And then?" Nell stood abruptly. The chair legs scraped the floor too loudly, making her flinch at the sound she had made herself. She went to a pantry cabinet, opened it, and removed a flower tin decorated with faded red roses. From beneath a bag of sugar, she pulled out a small external drive wrapped in a dish towel. She held it in both hands, like a coal, like a sin. "I copied reports before I left," she said. "Not everything, I didn't have access to everything, but enough to know what I had been helping tidy." Beckett did not reach for it. Why keep it? Nell's eyes drifted toward the photograph in the sitting room. "Martin died before I knew what to do with it." Afterward, Pinebridge sent a letter from Grant Pell's office reminding me of my confidentiality agreement. They mentioned our mortgage by name. Our medical debt too. Her lips pressed together until they went white. Fear is very efficient when it arrives on letterhead. Before Nell could plug in the drive, Mica rose and walked into the sitting room. He did not sniff the shelves or the door. He went straight to Martin's photograph, sat before it, and gently touched the old slipper with his nose. Nell stopped breathing. Then Mica picked up the slipper with impossible care, carried it back to the kitchen, and placed it at Nell's feet. For several seconds, no one moved. Nell covered her mouth with both hands, tears breaking loose without sound. "That was the slipper he stole," she whispered. "Miriam said God sometimes sends witnesses with paws because people are too proud to testify." Beckett looked at the dog, then at the drive in Nell's trembling hands. Some doors did not open because a man knocked. Some opened because a memory found its way back carrying an old slipper. Nell sat down slowly. Her fear had not vanished. It had changed shape. She opened an old laptop on the kitchen table. It took a long time to start, humming like a tired insect. While it woke, Nell folded and unfolded the edge of the dish towel around the drive. "I won't give this directly to you," she said. "Good." She looked surprised. "If this is what you say it is, it needs a chain of custody," Beckett said. "Someone official." Nell studied him. "You were military, yes, you want to break doors. Sometimes, but not this one." He looked at the laptop screen as it flickered to life. "Not if breaking it lets them say the evidence was stolen, mishandled, or altered." For the first time, Nell looked less afraid of him. She plugged in the drive. Folders appeared. Pinebridge used clean names, client risk support, stewardship profiles, winter safety priority, legacy transition indicators. Nell opened one file and turned the laptop toward him. Rows of data filled the screen: names, addresses, property estimates, family status, medical notes, communication patterns, church affiliations, debt indicators, repair urgency ratings, mail control status. Then the columns that made Beckett's jaw lock: family distance, winter anxiety, medical dependence, legacy language response, shame silence probability, mail control potential, property lien vulnerability, pet attachment, not people, targets. Nell scrolled carefully, not far, then stopped. Miriam Calloway. Her name sat in a clean cell, stripped of warmth, voice, history, and flour-dusted hands. Primary property: Heron Point residence, family, military nephew. Irregular contact. Profile: former guardian figure, high pride, high shame retention, approach, legacy protection, winter safety urgency, mail assistance, repair liability, pet bond significant. For a moment, Beckett did not understand because some decent part of his mind refused to. Then it did. His aunt had not stumbled into a trap. She had been studied into one. "They knew about Mica," he said. Nell nodded. "They tracked attachments, pets, churches, old neighbors, military family, dead spouses, anything that could become leverage or comfort." Comfort? Laurel believed trust had to wear a familiar face. Nell's voice thinned. "If someone loved a dog, the outreach script mentioned safety for pets during winter emergencies. If someone feared burdening family, the script used independence language. If someone had a military relative, the script emphasized not distracting them from service. Beckett stared at the words, high shame retention. Something cold passed through him, cleaner than anger. Anger wanted to strike. This wanted to remember every name. Nell began to cry without sound. I entered some of those fields, she said. Not all, but some. I told myself I was just copying from assessment forms. I told myself categories were not harm, but categories told them where to press. Mica moved to her side and placed his head against her knee. Nell flinched at first. Then her hand lowered into his fur. The touch broke whatever careful wall she had built in herself. I am sorry, she whispered. Beckett said nothing, not because he was cruel, because forgiveness was not his to distribute like supplies. Nell wiped her face with the heel of her hand and clicked another folder. North Shore Wellness Review, she said. That is where the medical language came from. A PDF opened. Clinical Director Dr. Simon Calder. His signature appeared at the bottom of several assessment summaries. The language was cautious, foggy, and poisonous. Potential difficulty managing complex financial obligations. Recommended structured support for winter property safety compliance. Male assistance advisable due to missed response risk. Temporary stewardship review may reduce harm. None of it said Miriam was incompetent. None of it had to. It sounds like concern, Nell said. That's what makes it useful. Did he meet her? I doubt it. Many reports came from phone screens or forms Pinebridge staff filled before the call. Beckett thought of Miriam's pale hands around the motel coffee. He pulled out his phone. I need Sheriff Marin Odell. Nell stiffened. No, yes. She won't understand. Then I'll explain what she doesn't. She already had complaints, Nell said. People went to her. Beckett heard the accusation beneath the fear. Then she needs a chance to stop being late, he called. Sheriff Marin Odell arrived 40 minutes later in a dark county SUV. Tires hissing over the snow. She was in her mid-40s, tall enough to carry authority without reaching for it, with a sturdy, practical build and dark brown hair pulled into a low knot beneath a winter sheriff's cap. Her face was serious, weathered by long shifts and bad roads, with sharp gray eyes and a mouth that did not smile easily because it knew smiles could be mistaken for promises. She wore a Navy sheriff's winter jacket, duty pants, boots, and the plain fatigue of a woman who had seen too many civil disputes pretending not to be crimes. She did not come alone. With her was Carmen Wexler, an investigator from the Michigan Elder Protection Financial Crimes Unit. Carmen was 41, compact and composed, with warm brown skin, black hair cut in a neat bob just below her jaw, and dark eyes that moved with precise intelligence. She wore a charcoal winter coat over a dark turtleneck and carried a leather document bag instead of a weapon in sight. Her manner was calm, but not soft. She looked like someone who believed evidence had a spine and intended to make it stand. Nell nearly refused to let them in. Then Mica, still by her chair, rested his head against her leg again. Nell opened the door. Marin listened first. To her credit, she did not interrupt. Carmen asked careful questions. When did Nell work for Pinebridge? What was her access level? Did she copy the files before or after leaving? Who else had access? Could she identify original systems, metadata, file paths, staff initials? Beckett watched Carmen build a bridge beneath the truth, one plank at a time. Not drama, procedure. Nell did not hand over the drive loosely. Carmen photographed it in place, had Nell describe where it had been kept, placed it in an evidence bag, labeled it, and had both Nell and Marin sign. She also asked Nell to show only the portion relevant to Miriam and a few redacted examples, explaining that other residents' private information could not be spread casually without harming the very people they were trying to protect. Beckett disliked how slow it felt. He also knew she was right. Marin stood near the kitchen window, face tight. I had 3 complaints, she said finally, maybe 4. Each one came with signed contracts, bank confirmations, a medical recommendation, and a lawyer telling me it was civil. Her voice did not excuse itself. It reported its own failure. Carmen looked at her. Now you may have a pattern. Marin's eyes moved to Beckett. Your aunt is safe. For now. For now is not a plan. No, Beckett said. It is a place to start. Before they left, Nell gripped the back of a chair. Tell Miriam something, she said. Beckett turned. Nell swallowed hard. Tell her Martin remembered the lake story. The one about you falling through thin ice up to your waist and pretending you meant to do it. For the first time that day, the pressure in Beckett's chest shifted. I was 12, he said. Nell's mouth trembled toward a broken smile. She said you walked home with your pants frozen stiff and still tried to look dignified. Mica looked up at him. Beckett sighed. That story has been exaggerated by hostile witnesses. Nell's smile faded, but something human remained. Miriam never made Martin feel like dying was the only thing true about him, she said. I helped people who made others feel like shame was the only thing true about them. No one spoke. Then Carmen lifted the sealed evidence bag. Then help us make the record say otherwise. The drive back to Snowbright Harbor followed a narrow road beside frozen fields and dark pines. Afternoon clouds had gathered low over the lake, turning the sky the color of pewter. Beckett drove with both hands relaxed on the wheel. Mica stood in the passenger seat, not lying down. His ears shifted before Beckett saw the vehicle. A black SUV appeared 2 turns back, then remained there. Not too close, not far enough. Beckett watched it in the rearview mirror. When he slowed near a mailbox, it slowed. When he accelerated gently along the straightaway, it matched. Mica gave a low growl. I see it, Beckett said. The old part of him woke without drama. Speed, distance, road surface, visibility, witnesses, camera locations. Do not panic, do not perform, do not gift the enemy a scene. Ahead, a county snowplow station sat beside the road, orange trucks lined in the yard, cameras mounted on the office eaves. Beckett signaled early, slowed, and turned in. The SUV continued past. As it did, Beckett lifted his phone and captured the rear plate through the windshield. The image was not perfect, but it was enough. Mica kept growling until the vehicle disappeared over the rise. No chase, Beckett said. No hero nonsense. Mica glanced at him. Yes, I heard how boring that sounded. Back at Sunrise Motor Court, Miriam sat by the window with the cream scarf around her shoulders. Rita had left a sandwich on the table, cut diagonally because, according to a note, triangles taste less lonely. Beckett told Miriam only what she needed first. Nell was alive, frightened, and willing to help. The evidence was now with people who could protect it properly. There were files, and some of them named Miriam. He did not soften the truth by hiding its shape. He showed her the printed excerpt Carmen had allowed him to bring, redacted except for Miriam's own profile. Miriam read it slowly. Primary property, Heron Point residence, family, military nephew, irregular contact, high pride, high shame retention, responds to legacy protection, pet bond significant. Her hand did not shake at first, then it did. Mica placed his chin on her knee. Beckett began, Aunt Miri. She lifted one hand, not sharply. Enough. This time she did not need him to speak before she did. Miriam looked at the words until they stopped being mysterious and became insulting. Then she exhaled. They named my shame, she said, so they would know where to press. Beckett sat across from her, silent. Outside, snow began again, soft against the motel window. Miriam's thumb moved over Mica's collar, over the metal tag she had once had engraved with a command she probably never knew would become prophecy. But if they could name it, she said, voice thin but steady, then I can call it into the light. Mica closed his eyes beneath her hand. Beckett looked at his aunt, at the scarf around her shoulders, at the dog who had carried an old slipper like a testimony, at the winter pressing against the glass. For the first time since he had come home, Miriam did not look like a woman being rescued. She looked like a witness preparing to stand. Harbor Covenant Church had a basement built for casseroles, folding chairs, and grief that did not want to be seen from the street. By late afternoon, snow had begun falling again over Snowbright Harbor, soft enough to look harmless and steady enough to make every road feel like a warning. The church stood 2 blocks from the town square, a white wooden building with a steep roof, narrow stained glass windows, and a bell tower that had survived storms, budget meetings, and at least 3 pastors who believed volume was the same as conviction. The basement entrance was around the side, down a short set of concrete steps, salted by a man who clearly believed lawsuits were more frightening than ice. Beckett Calloway arrived first with Mica beside him. The former Navy SEAL wore his usual old tactical combat shirt in olive green and military gray, frayed at the shoulders and cuffs, earthy brown and moss green combat pants, worn brown military work boots, and the black military watch on his left wrist. His clean-shaven face looked calm from a distance, but the gray-blue eyes had that cold, contained focus that came over him when he was trying not to let anger choose the next step. Mica moved down the basement stairs with silent certainty. The 7-year-old German shepherd's black saddle and warm tan chest stood out against the dim church walls. His ears remained upright, his amber-brown eyes taking in every corner, every chair, every person who might need watching before they knew it themselves. The basement smelled of old hymnals, floor wax, coffee, damp wool, and something cooking in large quantity. Rita Snow had arrived before them, despite claiming she did not do church basements unless legally required or fed. She stood near the kitchen counter with 2 heavy soup pots and a ladle in her hand like a courtroom weapon. Her short white curls were tucked beneath a knitted cap, and her burgundy cardigan had been replaced by a thick navy sweater under an apron that read "Kiss the cook and answer for your crimes." "This is not a meeting," Rita announced as Beckett entered. Meetings have agendas and men who say circle back. This is soup with paperwork nearby. Understood, Beckett said. No, you do not understand. Understanding requires bowls. She pointed toward a stack of them. Mica walked over and sat beside her. Rita looked down. And you do not get soup. Mica blinked with perfect dignity. Don't look at me like that. I have survived worse negotiators. Pastor Caleb Ahern came down the stairs carrying a folding table under one arm. He was a man in his early 50s, tall and lean, with warm brown skin, close-cropped black hair graying at the temples, and gentle eyes behind rectangular glasses. His left leg dragged slightly from an old car accident, but he moved with a patience that made the limp seem less like weakness and more like punctuation. He had the calm manner of someone who had heard many confessions and learned that people rarely needed thunder when a chair would do. I found 2 more tables, he said, and the copier works if nobody asks it to hurry. Rita snorted. That machine has the soul of a tired mule. Most faithful creatures do, Pastor Caleb said. Mica's ears flicked. Beckett looked at him. Don't let it go to your head. People began arriving in 2s and 3s. Jessa Pruitt came with a cardboard box of files and the library's portable scanner. The thin librarian had her ash-brown and silver hair pinned low, wire-rimmed glasses sliding down her nose, and a long olive cardigan wrapped tight around her like armor made of quiet. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the scanner on the table, but her mouth was set in a line Beckett had not seen before. Fear was still there. So was decision. Della Marwick from the Blue Heron Diner arrived with a tray of cornbread and the air of someone prepared to feed people into courage. The strong-armed woman had tied her copper-red hair back with a blue bandana. Her apron still smelled faintly of grill smoke. She looked around at the folding chairs and said, "Well, if evil can wear a blazer, justice can sit on metal chairs." Otis Brandt came next, tall, bent, and bristling under his brown work jacket. His silver beard looked as if he had combed it with resentment. He carried his green notebook inside a plastic freezer bag, protecting it from snow like a relic. When Mica approached, Otis pointed at him. "No theft tonight." Mica sat. "Good. We understand each other." Lenora Dace arrived with Jessa's help. Beckett recognized her only from Otis's story. In person, she was smaller than the image her name suggested. A 74-year-old widow with warm brown skin, delicate bones, and a back kept straight by old pride. She wore a dark purple winter coat, matching purple gloves, and a knitted hat pinned with a small silver cranberry brooch. Her hair, mostly white, escaped in soft curls around her face. Lenora's eyes were large, dark, and tired, but there was a queenly stubbornness in the way she entered the room, as if every chair should be grateful she had decided to use it. "I brought photographs," she said, lifting a worn envelope, "before they called my land unsafe." Behind her came Harriet Lowe. Harriet was 76, a retired schoolteacher with a narrow frame, stooped shoulders, and pale skin mapped with fine lines. Her white hair was pinned into a bun so tight it seemed held together by discipline alone. She wore a brown wool coat, sensible shoes, and thick glasses that magnified blue eyes still sharp enough to correct grammar across a room. She carried a canvas satchel full of documents and apologized to the doorframe when she bumped it. "I was not late," she said immediately. The sidewalk was arguing. Pastor Caleb smiled. "The sidewalk has always been difficult." More followed. A former mill worker named Ernie Vale, broad-faced and quiet, with hands that seemed too large for the paper cup he held. A widow named Pauline Kessler, thin and bird-like, with a red scarf and a habit of whispering before every sentence as if asking permission from the air. Not everyone was ready to speak. Some had come only to listen. That was allowed. Miriam arrived last. Beckett had offered to walk beside her from the truck, but she had taken Mica's leash instead. She came down the basement stairs slowly, one careful step at a time, the cream scarf around her shoulders, silver white hair pinned back, pale blue-gray eyes moving over the room. Her face tightened when she saw how many people were there. Then Mica pressed his shoulder lightly against her leg, not pushing, reminding. Miriam entered. The room changed around her, not because she was famous, not because she was loud, but because many of the people there had seen her disappear in pieces, and had never known how to name their own vanishing until she came back carrying hers. Carmen Wexler arrived with Sheriff Marin Odell soon after. Carmen wore a charcoal winter coat over a dark turtleneck, her black bob neat despite the weather, her leather document bag held close. Her dark eyes moved over the room with professional care, not cold but precise. Sheriff Marin stood beside her in a Navy sheriff's jacket, hair tucked under a cap, serious gray eyes, taking in the faces of people she knew she should have listened to sooner. Carmen did not start with a speech. She started with consent. No one has to share more than they want, she said. No one's documents will be copied without permission. If you tell us something tonight, we will explain how it may be used before it becomes part of a report. You are not evidence. You are people. The evidence is what was done to you. The room stayed silent after that. Then Rita set down the ladle with a loud metal clack. And now we eat before everybody faints from righteousness. That broke the room open just enough. Bowls moved. Chairs scraped. Papers were laid out beside napkins. People ate with one hand and held their folders with the other, as if letting go of either food or proof might be dangerous. They did not call it a victim's meeting. Rita called it the paperwork supper. It fit. Otis spoke first because he preferred to dislike things before anyone else had the chance. He laid his green notebook on the table and opened it to the pages he had shown Beckett. I had a boat repair shop by the harbor for 38 years. Pinebridge called it debt relief conversion. I called it being robbed by people who owned better pens. Carmen listened. Marin listened harder. Otis explained that he signed because they said his old business debts could be bundled, reduced, and protected. He wanted to leave the shop to his nephew in Oregon, even though the nephew sold expensive coffee and probably would not know a propeller from a pie plate. I wanted him to have the choice, Otis said. His voice went rough. They did not just take the shop. They took the future I was trying to leave behind. Lenora opened her envelope. She passed around photographs of cranberry fields in summer. Red berries floating in flooded bogs. Her late husband standing knee-deep in water, grinning beneath a battered hat. A small white shed with purple morning glories climbing the side. They said the water system was unsafe, Lenora said. Her voice was soft, musical, and edged with old anger. They said if I stayed and something happened, my family could face liability. I do not have much family. That did not stop them from using the word. Harriet Lowe sat with her hands folded on top of her satchel. I signed mail care because my eyes were failing, she said. They said they would help sort my medication notices. They sorted my life instead. Her mouth trembled and she stopped. Mica rose from beside Miriam. He crossed the room slowly, every eye following him. He did not go to Beckett. He did not go to the soup. He went to Harriet and placed his head gently against her knee. Harriet looked down through thick glasses. "Oh," she whispered. Mica stayed. The old teacher's hand lowered into his fur. "I taught third grade for 42 years, Harriet said, voice shaking. I taught children how to read warning signs on roads, labels on medicine bottles, notes from home. Then I became the woman who could not read the trap placed in front of her." Otis cleared his throat. "Dog should be a lawyer." Knows when to object by leaning. A few people laughed, not loudly, but laughter crossed the basement like the first bird over thawing ground. As the small laughter faded, Pauline Kessler, the bird-like widow in the red scarf, lifted one trembling hand. "I got one of those letters too," she said. Carmen turned toward her. "From Pinebridge?" Pauline shook her head and reached into her purse. She pulled out a white envelope with no return address, folded soft from being handled too many times. Inside was a photocopy of a Pinebridge form she had never understood. At the bottom, beside a list of coded initials, someone had circled 3 letters in blue ink, M.C.H.P. Urgent before festival. Miriam's hand went still on Mica's collar. Beckett looked at the paper, then at the room full of faces. No one spoke. The festival was still days away, but Pinebridge had marked Miriam before the town ever saw the lanterns, and someone had been sending warnings to more than one frightened person. Carmen photographed Pauline's envelope and asked permission before making a copy. Her calm became even more focused. "Has anyone else received something they did not understand?" she asked. 3 hands rose. Then a 4th. Documents came out slowly. A duplicate notice tucked into a cookbook, a fee schedule hidden between church bulletins, a contractor estimate with initials in blue pencil. None of it was enough alone. Together it began to breathe. Sheriff Marin stood very still. Beckett watched her face. He saw the moment the old explanation died. Civil dispute, misunderstanding, signed contract, private matter. Those phrases could not hold the weight of the room anymore. Marin removed her cap. "I owe some of you an apology," she said. Several people looked down, uncomfortable with authority confessing in public. Marin continued anyway. "I had complaints. Not enough, I thought. Not clear enough. Every time there were signatures, contracts, bank confirmations, medical recommendations, and a lawyer telling my office it was civil. I let the paperwork tell me when to stop looking." Her voice tightened. That was wrong. No one rushed to forgive her. That, too, was right. Miriam looked at the sheriff for a long moment. "Will you look now?" Marin met her eyes. "Yes." Carmen stepped in, not to rescue Marin, but to shape what came next. "We may be looking at financial exploitation of vulnerable adults," she said. possibly fraud, coercion, improper use of property liens, interference with mail, and misuse of medical screening language. But if this goes forward, it has to be handled properly, Otis grunted. Properly is what they hid behind. Then we do it better, Carmen said. The answer landed. Beckett liked her for it. Jessa set up the scanner. Della began labeling folders with tape and marker. Pastor Caleb found another extension cord. Rita served second bowls to anyone whose hands shook too much to hold paper. The church basement became something between a war room and a kitchen wake. Miriam placed her tin box on the table. The brass key, the forwarded letter, the receipt, the blue label, the note about the lighthouse. Carmen reviewed each item carefully. When you cleaned at the lighthouse maintenance building, Carmen asked, did you see storage boxes? Miriam nodded. Along the back wall, some with blue labels. They told me not to touch them. Did you see any company name? Pinebridge on some. Winterization records on others. Could you identify the room? Yes. Mica, lying near Miriam's feet, lifted his head at the word lighthouse. Beckett noticed, so did Miriam. He smelled the paper there, she said. That first night, Carmen wrote something down. The storage location matters. Beckett asked, can you get a warrant? Not on a wish, Carmen said. But with Nell's drive, Otis's notebook, Miriam's documents, Pauline's form, and evidence of intimidation or concealment. Maybe, if we can establish that records are still there and at risk of removal. As if summoned by the word intimidation, Della's phone buzzed. Then Jessa's. Then Pastor Caleb's office phone rang upstairs. One by one, the room learned Pinebridge had moved faster than fear. Owen Slade had posted a video from the presentation. Della played it on her phone, holding it where people could see. The video showed warm shots of Laurel speaking about dignity, smiling residents, coffee cups, flowers. Then Beckett appeared in a brief clip, face serious, speaking to Laurel. The audio had been cut to catch only his question. Do you? Out of context? It sounded like a threat. A caption beneath the video read, former military visitor confronts Pinebridge staff during senior safety event. The room went cold. Beckett watched himself on the small screen and felt an old familiar thing rise in him. Not fear, the urge to end the problem immediately. He knew how to make people stop. He knew how to push hard enough that rooms changed shape around him. He had spent years being useful because he could act when others froze. His hand moved toward his phone. He had copies, photos, names, the scanned excerpt from Nell's drive, the blue tab columns, the profile language. He could post enough online to make Pinebridge bleed before dawn. Carmen saw the movement. Don't, she said. The word was quiet, but it carried. Beckett looked at her. Della said, if he's got something that'll punch back, maybe let him punch. Carmen shook her head. If private data from older residents is posted online, Pinebridge will claim stolen information, privacy violation, and reckless harm. They will make this about him instead of what happened to you. Otis slammed one hand on the table. So we just sit while they paint him as a lunatic? No, Carmen said. We build something they cannot edit. Beckett's jaw worked once. Every instinct in him hated the slow road. Miriam rose slowly. The room quieted. She was still small, still tired, still wrapped in the cream scarf he had bought too late. But there was an old authority in her when she stood, the kitchen table kind. The kind that had once made a grieving boy eat eggs because sorrow was not allowed to starve him. Beckett, she said. He turned. They took my voice and called it protection, Miriam said. Do not take anyone else's voice and call it rescue. The words struck harder than anger. Mica came to stand beside her, shoulder against her leg. Miriam looked around the room. If my story is told, I will tell it. If Harriet's is told, Harriet chooses. If Otis wants to shout his from the roof, God help the roof. But we do not become like them by deciding what other people should survive. Otis muttered, my roof shouting would be excellent. Rita said, your balance is terrible. A few people laughed, but Beckett did not. He looked at his phone, then he put it face down on the table. It felt like laying down a weapon. It also felt strangely like picking up something heavier. Okay, he said. Carmen gave one short nod. Respect, not comfort. The evening stretched. Documents were scanned. Statements were written. Carmen made careful notes. Marin contacted the county prosecutor's office and requested emergency review. Pastor Caleb made fresh coffee that tasted like repentance in basement pipes. Rita declared it drinkable only in the spiritual sense. By the time people began putting on coats, the basement had changed. No one looked healed. No one looked safe. But they no longer looked singular. That mattered. Shame survived best in separate rooms. It weakened when given a table. Carmen's phone rang near 9:30. She stepped into the hall to answer, one hand pressed against her other ear. Beckett watched through the doorway as her face sharpened. She asked 3 questions, then listened for a long time. When she returned, every conversation stopped. "I have enough to request a limited search order for the Lighthouse storage room," she said. "It depends on the judge, but with risk of removal and supporting documents, we have a chance." For the first time all night, the room breathed together. Miriam closed her eyes. Beckett did not smile. Hope was not a result. It was only a door that might open. Then footsteps sounded on the stairs. Fast. Rita Snow, who had gone up to bring more cups, came down gripping the rail, her white curls wild from the cold. "Beckett," she said. The basement turned toward her. Rita held up her phone. Her practical face had gone pale beneath its usual armor. "Della's nephew just drove past Heron Point. Pine Bridge trucks are there. 2 of them. Work lights on." Miriam's hand flew to her mouth. Beckett stood so quickly, his chair scraped hard against the floor. Carmen looked at her watch. The clock on the wall ticked once, then again. "If they start pulling that porch before the order comes through," Marin said, reaching for her cap, "we may lose the room to argue." Carmen's voice was calm, but the calm had steel in it. "Then we move now, carefully." Beckett looked at Miriam. She did not say no. She did not tell him to stay. Instead, she reached down and touched Mica's collar, her thumb brushing the metal tag. "Bring them home." The dog looked up at Beckett, ears forward, body ready. For once, the mission ahead was not across an ocean. It waited at the end of a snowy road, under a porch that still remembered his aunt's boots. On the 7th morning, Snowbright Harbor dressed itself in lantern light. By noon, strings of gold bulbs hung along the lakefront walk. Paper lanterns swung from black iron posts, their warm skins trembling in the cold wind off Lake Superior. Storefronts stayed open late, breathing coffee, cinnamon, and baked sugar into the bright winter air. Children were not needed to make the town feel young that day. The snow itself seemed young, fresh and shining on rooftops, benches, pine boughs, and the old harbor stones. The lake beyond the town lay dark blue beneath a clear sky, too vast to be impressed by human ceremonies. Winter Lantern Festival was Snowbright Harbor's proudest tradition. Every year, residents gathered near the harbor and the old lighthouse to mark the slow turning from the hardest part of winter toward the promise of thaw. Candles were lit. Names were remembered. Soup was served in paper bowls. People told stories about storms that had failed to kill them. This year, Pine Bridge Elder Stewardship had placed its silver pine logo everywhere, on banners, on donation boards, on the festival program, on a polished stage near the lake where Laurel Fenwick would announce the next phase of Aurora Walk. "A beautiful future," the banners said. Beckett Calloway stood behind Harbor Covenant Church with Miriam, Mica, Sheriff Marin Odell, and Carmen Wexler while the town celebrated 3 streets away. He wore his old olive-gray tactical combat shirt again, the shoulders and cuffs frayed, his combat pants dark with melted snow at the hem, his brown military work boots planted on the salted pavement. His clean-shaven face was calm, but his gray-blue eyes had narrowed into the old focus Miriam recognized and feared. He looked like a man preparing to cross into danger, though the danger ahead had locks, folders, and official seals instead of gunfire. Miriam wore the cream scarf around her shoulders and her worn winter coat buttoned to the throat. She looked tired, older than 72 in the hard light, but no longer hidden inside herself. Her silver-white hair had been pinned back. Her pale blue-gray eyes moved from the road to the sheriff's SUV, then to Mica. Mica sat beside her, black saddle dark against the snow, warm tan chest broad and steady amber-brown eyes fixed on the direction of the lighthouse. The metal tag at his collar rested against his fur. "Bring them home." Carmen stood near the church steps, phone pressed to one ear, leather document bag under her arm. She listened without speaking, her dark eyes hard and still. Sheriff Marin waited beside the county SUV, one hand on the door, navy winter jacket zipped, cap pulled low over her dark hair. When Carmen ended the call, she turned to them. "The judge signed a limited order," she said. "Only the lighthouse maintenance storage areas described in Miriam's statement. We document everything. No one touches anything unless I say so, or Sheriff Odell does." Beckett nodded. Marin looked at him directly. "You are there as the reporting party and to help identify areas Miriam described. You do not force entry. You do not seize records. You do not chase anyone." "I understand." Rita Snow, standing by the church door with a thermos in her hand and a face full of disapproval, snorted. "He understands. Whether he obeys is why the Lord invented witnesses." Miriam reached for Beckett's sleeve. "Obi," he looked at her. There was a time when that single word, from that single woman, could make a furious boy put down a chair he had been about to throw. Apparently, it still worked. "Yes, Mom," he said. The old lighthouse rose at the edge of the harbor like a white bone against the winter sky. Its paint had peeled in places, and ice clung to the iron rail near the lantern room. The attached maintenance building sat low and weather-beaten beside it, with a red side door, narrow windows, and snow piled against the foundation. Festival lanterns had been hung along the public path, but the rear service yard remained quiet. Marin approached the door first with Deputy Jonah Price. Jonah was new to Beckett, a broad-shouldered deputy in his early 30s with a sandy buzz-cut, ruddy cheeks, and the careful seriousness of a young officer determined not to become either arrogant or useless. He wore a county winter jacket over his uniform, and his hands were steady as he held the search order and body camera. A Pine Bridge contractor was already at the rear entrance, loading a plastic crate into a white van. He froze when he saw Marin. The man was in his late 40s, thick through the middle, with a shaved head, a red wind-burned face, and a gray work jacket bearing a small Pine Bridge patch. His name, stitched on the chest, read Vince Raleigh. He had the blunt expression of a man used to following work orders and not asking whether the work was clean. "Storage is closed for the festival," Vince said. Marin held up the order. "Not anymore." Vince looked toward Beckett, then toward Carmen. His confidence drained a little. "I'm just the facilities lead." "Then lead yourself 2 steps back," Rita muttered from behind them. Marin shot her a look. Rita lifted both hands. "I am emotionally present, not legally involved." The door opened into the smell Beckett remembered. Bleach, cold water, damp cardboard, old ink. Mica entered on a short leash at Beckett's side. He did not strain, he did not bark. His nose lifted once, then turned toward the back of the storage room. The main room held mops, salt bags, old festival decorations, extension cords, paint cans, and stacked folding barriers. Carmen photographed the entrance, the room, the crates, the labels. Deputy Jonah recorded. Marin kept Vince near the doorway. Miriam stood just inside, one hand at her throat. "This is where they had me clean," she said. Her voice was steady enough to be heard. "That wall," Carmen said. Miriam pointed toward the rear. Mica had already turned that way. Behind a row of plastic snow fence rolls sat a section of floor partly covered by a warped mat. Mica stopped over it and lowered his head. His body went very still. Then he looked back at Beckett, not pleading, reporting. Carmen crouched but did not touch. "Photograph first." Jonah took pictures. Marin asked Vince what was beneath the mat. "No idea," he said too quickly. Rita whispered, "I would have gone with a floor personally." Marin ignored her with visible effort. The mat was lifted. Beneath it was a narrow wooden hatch set into the floor, its pull ring rusted but recently scraped clean at one edge. Carmen looked at Miriam. "Did you ever see this opened?" "No, but I saw men moving boxes back here. I thought it was festival storage." Carmen nodded to Jonah. The hatch was opened. A colder smell rose out, paper packed in damp air. Below was a shallow crawl storage space, no more than 4 feet deep, lined with old boards. Inside were cardboard file boxes stacked in 2 rows. Some bore Pine Bridge Elder Stewardship labels. Some read winteration records. Some had blue tabs clipped to their lids. Miriam made a sound that was not quite speech. Beckett did not move. He had promised, but every muscle in him wanted to climb down and pull the boxes into daylight with his own hands. Carmen went first, gloved and careful. Jonah followed. They passed boxes up one by one. Each was photographed in place, labeled, logged, and set on plastic sheeting. The first box held mail care authorization forms. The second held forwarded envelopes. The third held medical screening summaries from North Shore Wellness Review. The fourth held property lien documents. The fifth held files marked with blue tabs. Mica stood beside Miriam, shoulder against her leg. Then Carmen opened a narrow file box near the end of the row. She stopped. "Calloway," she said gently. Miriam looked at her. "There are letters here addressed to you." The room seemed to dim around the words. Carmen removed a bundle wrapped in a rubber band. Beckett saw his own handwriting before anyone said anything more, his letters, months of them. Some unopened, some stamped as forwarded, some clipped to a file labeled Managed Correspondence. Miriam reached out, then pulled her hand back as if the letters might burn her. Carmen handed them to her only after documenting the bundle. Miriam held them to her chest. The lighthouse groaned softly in the wind above them. For a moment, Beckett was no longer 34. He was 9 again, standing in Miriam's kitchen after the funeral, refusing eggs while she quietly made more toast. He was 22, leaving for service and pretending not to see her wipe her eyes on a dish towel. He was 34, in a motel room, learning that absence had been helped along by people with stamps and folders. "I wrote," he said. Miriam nodded, her face breaking. "I know." Mica pressed his head into her coat. Carmen opened another folder, a site map, Aurora Walk Phase 1, Lot H19 highlighted in blue. Beside it, typed in clean black letters, "Access critical for Phase 1 continuity." Marin's jaw tightened. "That's enough for emergency preservation," Carmen said. "Call it in." By the time they reached Heron Point, the Pine Bridge work crew had already put orange cones near Miriam's old porch. 2 men were unloading tools. A temporary barrier leaned against the fence. A white truck idled by the drive. The rental couple from the first day stood near the front window, pale and confused, wrapped in winter coats over indoor clothes. Deputy Jonah stepped out first and ordered the crew to stop. Marin followed, showing the preservation notice. Carmen documented the equipment, the cones, the work order clipped to a board. Vince Rawley, who had been brought from the Lighthouse, stared at the porch as if it had betrayed him by becoming important. The rental woman from Chapter 1, whose name Beckett learned was Clara Hensley, came onto the porch. In daylight, she looked younger than before, maybe early 40s, with chestnut hair pulled back, a narrow face, and worried brown eyes. Her husband, Paul Hensley, followed behind her, a soft-bodied man with sandy hair, wire glasses, and the anxious decency of someone realizing too late that comfort can be rented from another person's loss. "We didn't know," Clara said. Miriam looked at her. The 2 women stood on opposite sides of the same threshold, one who had rented warmth, one who had been removed from it. "I believe you," Miriam said. Clara's eyes filled with tears, that was all. The crew was sent away. The porch was photographed. The property was marked for temporary preservation. For the first time since Beckett had arrived in Snowbright Harbor, the house was not called a cottage, a lot, a rental, or a transition asset. It was treated like a place where harm had happened. That mattered. The festival crowd had gathered by the time they reached the lakefront stage. Lanterns glowed in rows. People held coffee in soup bowls. Pine Bridge banners moved in the wind. At the center of the stage, Laurel Fenwick stood beneath a silver pine logo, elegant in a cream coat and pale blue scarf, her dark blonde hair smooth despite the cold. Beside her stood Grant Pell, angular and polished in a charcoal overcoat, his narrow mouth already prepared to call disaster a misunderstanding. Owen Slade hovered near the stage edge with his camera, filming the warmest faces and avoiding the ones beginning to worry. Laurel had begun speaking. "Snowbright Harbor has always known how to make light in winter," she said. "Tonight, Aurora Walk invites us to carry that light into a future worthy of our elders, our families, and the shoreline that shaped us." A soft wave of applause moved through the crowd. Then Sheriff Marin stepped onto the stage. The applause thinned. Laurel turned, smile intact. "Sheriff Odell, how wonderful. We were just—" "This announcement is paused," Marin said. The crowd shifted. Grant Pell moved forward. "Sheriff, this is a permitted civic presentation." Carmen stepped beside Marin, calm as iron. "And several properties connected to that presentation are now subject to an active financial exploitation investigation." The words did not explode. They spread. People looked at one another. Older residents leaned closer. Della Marwick, near the soup booth, folded her arms. Otis stood beside her with his green notebook clutched like a weapon. Jessa Pruitt had one hand over her mouth. Rita Snow, holding a festival coffee, whispered, "About time the soup boiled over." Laurel gave the crowd a sorrowful smile. "I understand emotions are high. Pine Bridge has always welcomed review. We must be careful not to let fear and misinformation harm the very seniors we serve." Beckett stood below the stage with Miriam and Mica. He wanted to step forward. He did not. This was not his voice to take. Nora Feltz emerged from the side of the crowd. The bank employee looked ashen in the lantern light. Her auburn bob whipped against her cheek in the wind. She wore the same charcoal blazer beneath a winter coat, and her hands trembled around a manila envelope. "I saw transfers," Nora said. Grant Pell turned sharply. "Mrs. Feltz." Nora flinched but did not stop. "From protected home accounts into Glassmere Holdings, small amounts at first. Then larger ones when liens were filed. I flagged them twice. I was told they had legal review." Carmen looked at her. "Are you willing to make a statement?" Nora nodded, tears bright in her eyes. "Yes." Owen Slade lowered his camera. For the first time since Beckett had seen him, he looked unsure where to point it. Then a man near the stage began pushing through the crowd. Dr. Simon Calder was taller than his business card photo suggested, in his early 50s, with silver-brown hair, a square jaw, and a physician's practice smile that had begun to fail at the edges. He wore a dark wool overcoat over a suit and leather gloves too fine for the weather. His face was handsome in a polished professional way, but panic had made it ordinary. "I signed screening recommendations," he said quickly, "not competency removals. Pine Bridge supplied intake data. I never authorized coercion." Laurel's eyes flashed. There it was, the first fracture in public. Grant Pell stepped toward Calder, but Marin raised a hand. "No more statements here without counsel," the sheriff said. "But you will be contacted." Laurel turned back to the crowd. Her smile had become thinner, but she still held it like a shield. "This is an unfortunate mischaracterization of a complex initiative," she said. Miriam moved. Beckett noticed only when Mica rose beside her. His aunt stepped toward the stage. Not quickly, not dramatically. Each step looked difficult, but she took it anyway. The cream scarf lay across her shoulders. In one hand, she held the bundle of letters. In the other, the old brass key from her tin box. Marin looked at her, then stepped aside. Miriam faced the crowd. For a moment, no microphone was lowered. Then Pastor Caleb, standing near the stage, moved forward and adjusted it for her with gentle hands. Miriam looked out at Snowbright Harbor, at the bakery woman, the librarian, the boat mechanic, the diner owner, the sheriff, the renters, the people who had known something and not enough, the people who had feared, the people who had profited by not looking too closely. Her voice was thin at first. Then it steadied. "My house is marked on that map as Lot H19. Someone brought the Aurora Walk display board forward." The blue line of the boardwalk shone under the lanterns. Miriam pointed to the square. "That is not a lot." Silence moved through the crowd. "That is where I taught a 9-year-old boy to eat breakfast after he decided grief could feed him better than eggs. That is where I left a porch light burning when he went away. That is where I waited for letters I was told had stopped coming." Beckett lowered his head. Miriam held up the bundle. They did not stop. The wind stirred the pages. Mica sat at her feet, ears forward, the metal tag at his collar tapping softly against the ring. "Bring them home." Laurel stood frozen. Miriam looked at her, not with hatred, but with something older and more terrible. A witness's clarity. "You called it transition," Miriam said. "I called it shame because that is what you taught me to call it. But I am done using your names for what happened to me." The crowd remained silent. Then Otis Brandt lifted his notebook. "Me too," he said. Lenora Dace raised one purple-gloved hand. "And me." Harriet Lowe, standing beside Jessa, removed her glasses and wiped her eyes. "And me." One by one, not all at once, people began stepping forward. Not a mob, a record. Carmen looked at Marin. Marin nodded once. The investigation had begun before the speech, but the silence broke there under lantern light, where Pinebridge had planned to sell the town a future made of other people's stolen porches. The ending did not come quickly. Justice rarely arrives like a choir. More often, it arrives in stapled packets, court dates, preserved records, frozen accounts, sworn statements, and tired people refusing to go home before signing one more form. Pinebridge was not convicted that night. Laurel Fenwick was not led away in handcuffs beneath the lanterns. Grant Pell did not confess. Dr. Calder did not become righteous because he was frightened. Some homes remained tied in legal knots. Some losses would take months, maybe years, to untangle. But the work crew did not touch Miriam's porch. Aurora Walk Phase 1 was suspended pending review. The court granted temporary residential protection for Miriam at Heron Point while the investigation proceeded. The Hensleys, embarrassed and kind, moved out within the week and left a note on the kitchen counter apologizing for the warmth they had borrowed without knowing the cost. Beckett and Miriam returned to the house on a morning so bright the snow seemed to glow from within. He unlocked the back door with the old brass key. For a moment, Miriam did not enter. Mica went first, sniffed the threshold, then turned and waited. Miriam crossed into her home, not restored, not safe forever, not legally finished, but no longer erased. Weeks passed. Beckett repaired the porch board by board. He replaced the rotted rail, reinforced steps, checked the roofline, and fixed the back door that always stuck in damp weather. He could have made the porch silent. Instead, at Miriam's request, he left one step with its old familiar creak. "A house too quiet," she told him. "Sounds like it is hiding something." From the blue tabs, broken mailbox pieces, and old keys that no longer opened anything, Miriam made a wind chime. It hung where the shell chime had once been. At first, its sound was uneven, a strange little clatter in the lake wind. Then, over days, Beckett began to hear music in it. Rita called it aggressive art. Della said it sounded like paperwork losing an argument. Otis offered to tune it with pliers and was refused. Miriam smiled more often. Not always, not easily, but enough. Porch light table began in Miriam's kitchen with 6 people, a pot of coffee, and too many folders. Then it moved to Harbor Covenant Church on Thursdays. Carmen helped set guidelines. Marin arranged referrals. Jessa helped people read letters. Della fed anyone who pretended not to be hungry. Rita managed sign-in sheets with the authority of a border guard. Otis checked contractor estimates and insulted sloppy handwriting. Mica became the only unpaid staff member everyone trusted. He worked the room with solemn dignity, accepting dog biscuits as if they were notarized documents. When someone's voice shook, he sat beside them. When someone tried to apologize for needing help, he leaned harder. One evening after the first meeting ended, Beckett stood on Miriam's porch and watched the lake darken beyond the pines. Miriam came out with 2 mugs of coffee. "Still bad?" he asked. "Of course. Good coffee would make us arrogant." Mica lay between them, muzzle on his paws, eyes half closed. The porch light glowed above the door. For years, Beckett had believed a mission meant crossing oceans, carrying weapons, moving toward danger while others slept. He had thought rescue was something loud, fast, and finished when the smoke cleared. But Mica had taught him differently. Sometimes rescue began when a dog refused to leave a porch. Sometimes it continued through soup, paper, shame, and patience. Sometimes the bravest thing a man could do was stay long enough for someone else to speak. The wind moved across Heron Point. The chime of blue tabs, keys, and broken mail metal rang softly in the dark. Not pretty, not at first, but true. Miriam looked at Mica's collar. The metal tag caught the porch light. "Bring them home." "He did," she said. Beckett looked at his aunt, at the house that had raised him twice, at the dog who had followed a scent of love through snow, bleach, and paper lies. "No," he said softly, "he's still doing it, and somewhere in the bright northern cold, beneath a sky wide enough for mercy, the smallest miracle stood on 4 paws, keeping watch over a porch light that had finally found its way back to the window." Sometimes the miracle we pray for does not arrive with thunder, flashing lights, or a voice from the sky. Sometimes God sends it quietly. A loyal dog who refuses to walk away. A porch light still burning in the cold. A letter that finally finds the hands it was meant for. A broken heart brave enough to speak the truth. Beckett thought he had come home to rescue Miriam. But in the end, Mica showed him that rescue is not always about strength. Sometimes it is about listening. Sometimes it is about staying. Sometimes it is about noticing the people around us who smile in public but are quietly carrying burdens no one can see. In our daily lives, we may pass someone like Miriam at the grocery store, at church, at the library, or next door. Someone proud, someone tired, someone afraid to ask for help because shame has convinced them they should suffer alone. So let this story remind us, a small act of kindness can become a doorway back to hope. A phone call, a warm meal, a patient ear, or a simple question like, "Are you really okay?" may be the miracle God uses through us. And maybe, just maybe, the Lord still sends angels in forms we do not expect. Sometimes with hands, sometimes with paws, sometimes with a heart loyal enough to lead the lost back home. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, or share the name of a loyal dog, a loved one, or a quiet miracle you will never forget. And if you believe stories like this still matter, please subscribe to The Last Seal Shepherd, so more people can be reminded that love, loyalty, and faith can still shine through the coldest winters. May God bless you, protect your home, comfort your heart, and guide you with His light wherever life takes you. Until the next story, keep your porch light burning, keep your heart open, and never forget that sometimes God's smallest miracles leave the deepest paw prints.